What's the matter? Can't sleep?
Just need a little clarity.
True that. You want the customary clarity or the new and improved kind of clarity?
Just give me the new stuff.
New and improved clarity. Yes, indeed, clarity.
Come on.
There's more.
Yeah, don't bust my balls. You're gonna give me 4 and some of these duds.
Sweet dreams, Chief. Don't worry, none your secret's safe with me. Besides, I could use a little juice on my side.
What do you think you know, Micah?
It's like my daddy used to say. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights, to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you for bearing with us. We had a lot of clips to prepare for you tonight, and I'd like to welcome you to Armor of Truth Live number 186. We're going to take a special deep dive for you tonight on a very serious subject. All right, and right out of the box, let's give Summer some props and some shout outs and some credit for this research, which you're going to see tonight. She's prepared all of this, and I'm going to present it to you. And it is in depth, and this is going to be a message that's very important and not unlike, people might be asking, what in the world are you talking about? This is a Christian apologetics, polemics channel, but of course. Cultural apologetics means that we have to observe what's going on in the culture and understand it. And be able to talk about it. Filtering it all through the lens of the Christian worldview, because that's where you're going to find truth. That's where you're going to find solutions for everything. Right? Truth doesn't just exist in some parts of life. There's truth about your religion, but there's a different truth over here for your addiction. Truth is truth everywhere. So we're going to apply that tonight as we talk about this epidemic, this scourge, this plague. The new normal is about more than vaccine passports. It's about more than masks, lockdowns, trans kids, supply chain and food supply wars. It's about more than the Great Reset. There's a whole new market. And this one's not black. It's out in the open. The illicit drug market has moved into the mainstream. And the addiction industry has no answers. federal, state, and local governments are engaging in moralism in attempts to mitigate, to create strategies that can really only cause, as we've seen, an even more horrifying new normal. And in the streets of some cities, like we're going to show you here tonight, drug addicts are being catered to. The purest form of their drug of choice being given to them in street clinics, patrols in the streets carrying overdose antidote to save those who would otherwise perish from their deadly habit. And there are social organizations setting up facilities where drug addicts of all walks of life can come in, get their drug of choice. They can get clean works, clean tools and implements for the process. And they're then encouraged to snort, smoke, or inject right there on the premises. Now, what is the logical conclusion of this? Something like the opening clip I have for you tonight, Minority Report. Something like that, where in this real world that we're talking about, the only way this can end up is to have facilities where drug addicts just live and do drugs. It becomes a new profession, a new class of citizen, the state-sponsored drug addict. And this is called the humane response, the moral response, the right thing to the worst drug epidemic in the history of Canada and the USA. Now, we're going to tell you exactly where all of this is heading. We're going to tell you why nothing they're doing can possibly stop it. New terminology to be on the lookout for as we cover these issues for you tonight. The term harm reduction. Now, Biden, back last year, put in the budget for this year, put in the budget for next year for something called harm control, harm reduction. Spending, I don't remember, is 18 or 54 millions of dollars toward something called harm reduction, which is what I just described to you, harm reduction. New terms, polydrugs, synthetics, customizable superdrugs, fentanyl, and xylazine, which are being mixed to produce one of the most crippling combos of narcotic street venom ever to pierce the veil of human flesh. And it's called benzodope. And it's like nothing anyone's ever seen. And because the chemical ingredients are easily available anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, these not-so-covert chemists are constantly evolving these calamitous compositions into ever more potent poisons, potent potions. And there's no end in sight. The chemicals are readily available. Some of it's not even illegal. So what is fentanyl? We're gonna learn tonight. We need to know the facts about this. This is the world we live in. We don't have the luxury of running the other way. As Christians, we're on a rescue mission. We run into the fire. What are governments and the addiction industry, which is what it is, the addiction industry, so-called treatment, What are governments and the addiction industry doing to help the most helpless addicts ever seen on the North American continent? Harm reduction funding, making pure drugs available, and, of course, making readily available the same polytheistic religion of the 12-step program. And so we have to ask some questions about that, too. If it's true that only 2 out of 10 or something like that, or even less, 2 out of 10 addicts who stop using, these are people who were addicts but stopped. Only about 2 out of 10 addicts who stopped using ever used drug treatment, any 12-step program. And then we see the success rate of 12-step programs abysmal, in the single digits for what they call recovering addicts who stay sober, in the single digits, the success rate. So then what is the answer? It would seem that what they're offering, this is the solution. That answer to these questions just so happens to be our beat here at Armor of Truth. So we'll tell you the whole truth as we see it, as we've been able to uncover it here. This is truth on which you can stake your life. We can make that claim because we know where the truth is. It's not hidden. So welcome to the show, my friends. AOT Live 186. By the way, be on the lookout for Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern over on the Days of Noah channel. We'll have the Virtual Abyss. We'll be making a comeback. Myself and Days will be there. Going to keep the topic secret for now. Don't miss it. Days of Noah channel, 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Be there. So the way we're going about this today is narrative, or the fentanyl as a drug epidemic and as an effective narrative. Fentanyl as a drug epidemic and as an effective narrative. And our first point in the narrative part of this, fentanyl is the number one cause of overdose in the United States. That is the word from the authorities who keep up with such things. So we're talking about the new flow of fentanyl. In America, in 2021, there were over 100,000 overdose deaths. That is one American dying every 5 minutes by an overdose. Major cities report more fentanyl overdoses than COVID deaths. Be careful with that topic on this platform here. West Virginia alone had more than 75% of all the overdose fatalities in 2021. West Virginia, for years now, has been one of the worst hit states for this opiate epidemic, plague. For Americans under 50 years of age, overdose is the leading cause of death, higher than any other cause of death, including heart disease, cancer, and all other accidents. Dr. Matthew Christensen, director of the Office of Drug Control Policy, said, nationally, more deaths of Americans under 50 than any other cause of death, including heart disease, cancer, and all other accidents. In West Virginia alone, 75%. So that would be, can you imagine, one state, 75% of all the overdose deaths. Now, instead of overdose, with this epidemic we're seeing here, instead of overdose, the appropriate word is poisoning. And that is a word that some news agencies and reporters are using, that America is being poisoned. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Fentanyl is sold on the streets, it's sold in clubs, it's sold on the internet. That's how this new normal of super drugs and synthetics, that's how it's being done. You can order these ingredients easily. In fact, it's so prevalent that heroin and methamphetamine, you can't find them that are not laced with fentanyl. You'll hear later from some officials that for instance, when you have illicit pills that are sold on the street, they could have been stamped and just created, not necessarily diverted from a pharmacy or pharmaceutical company, but pills that are stamped, in wherever they do it, in a warehouse somewhere, and sold on the streets. 2 out of every 5 of those pills is laced, doesn't just have it in it, but is laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. There's also an analog of fentanyl called carfentanil, which the military-industrial complex has researched as an effective agent for chemical warfare. So, folks, this stuff is poison. It's so bad that social workers, public health, and safety officers and agencies are suggesting that everyone, everywhere, have Narcan at home in your first aid kits. Narcan is naloxone. Everyone needs to have it. Let's check out this clip, what they're telling us. It's so bad, they're saying, that all of us, that we need to have Narcan. That is the agent that reverses the effects of opioids and opiates when someone is in an overdose situation.
They're also urging Oregonians to brush up on Narcan.
What is Narcan?
Our sources, Ben Bayamont and Jackson Mitchell with Multnomah County's Harm Reduction Program, and Dr. Robert Hendrickson, Medical Director for the Oregon Poison Center.
Narcan or naloxone is an agent that reverses an opioid overdose. It can be given several different ways. It can be an injection in the hospital setting, but it's also available as an intranasal spray.
The nasal spray, the one any member of the public can buy and use, is the one all 3 men want you to know about, especially given that stats show fentanyl deaths in Multnomah County seem to have doubled between 2020 and 2021.
Would Narcan work in a situation where someone has ingested fentanyl?
And fentanyl is more potent than a lot of the other opioids on the market, oxycodone or morphine or heroin. However, we do expect naloxone or Narcan to work for fentanyl.
Our experts added anyone can get Narcan by walking into a pharmacy.
Did you hear that? Anyone can get it. It's not free, mind you. It's not free. Talk about this in just a moment. This is a very interesting part of this story.
You don't need a prescription, and the pharmacist will even train you on how to use it. Bayamont wanted to prove how easy it is.
I actually went to a local Fred Meyer pharmacy this morning just to try out the process myself. It did take a little bit of time just because the pharmacy was so busy, but everyone was super helpful. I was able to get it in about 20 minutes. I was able to get 2 doses of generic nasal brand Narcan from the pharmacy this morning.
If your insurance doesn't cover Narcan, it's about $90 for 2 doses.
Catch
All
that?
3 experts recommend most people have Narcan on hand. That goes double, they say, for anyone with loved ones who struggle with addiction or even just use opioid painkillers.
Even though you don't know someone, you could potentially come upon someone who has an opioid overdose.
So even if this isn't in some way part of your life, you don't have someone in your immediate family or circle of friends, loved ones who you know is a user, or what, you should have it anyway, they say, because you just might come across somebody who's overdosing. Okay, but did you catch that Narcan is available? You can walk into the pharmacy and ask for it. Typically, this is something you would need a prescription for, of course. Now, let's make it clear: Narcan is not. It's not the. It's not the drug. It's not fentanyl. It's not. This is the substance that reverses the effects in case if someone is overdosing. But here's what's interesting about that. Back in 2018, 2019, pharmaceutical company Roche began developing, manufacturing mass quantities of PCR tests. They were planning for this. Of course, we can't say much about that here, about what led up to the big pandemic and Event 201, things like that. But people wonder sometimes, if you want to follow a conspiracy or whatever, you need to follow the money, right? That's what people say, follow the money. Well, it just so happens that Roche is a pharmaceutical company that was producing mass quantities of PCR tests and kind of had the market cornered before 2020. And have recorded record profits from selling tests. This has a similar feel to it. Don't be too cynical about this. Don't be too cynical about it, because we're dealing with human beings here, real people, real lives. But if it's such a serious problem, why aren't you just giving them away? Everyone needs to have one in their home. Actually, should have 2 in your home. And it's going to cost you $90 to get them, according to this story anyway. So there's that. You can do with that what you will. That's an interesting wrinkle, though, don't you think? But we're talking about now synthetic drugs. Moving from plant-based drugs, from organic sources, to fully customizable super drugs. Like crystal meth, fentanyl, of course, xylazine, which is a benzodiazepine tranquilizer, typically intended for large animals like elephants. And these are now mixed, fentanyl, xylazine, now mixed to produce sometimes all 3, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and xylazine, all mixed to produce this new super drug called benzodope. Now, we don't have time to show you all the what that's like, and but you can plenty of information on YouTube about that. It's one of those. Typically, people use substances to usually use substances. You may have a drink, you may have some wine, you may take a benzo to feel better or to relax or something, right? This or the drug seeker, the one who the weekend warrior likes to go out and wants to get high. They want that high. What's interesting about the benzodope is as soon as they smoke it, shoot it, whatever. They're out. They're out. They're on the deep nod for hours, and that is why they've added the benzodiazepine to the fentanyl is so it will last longer. Because one of the problems they were having with this drug was that it was just too fast. It would get in and out. The effects would come on and wear off too quickly. So now by mixing it with this benzo, it seems to last a little longer, but the result of that is people are out of it. They don't remember where they were or what they did. Have you ever heard of a substance called scopolamine, which is it's also known as like a truth serum type drug that was used by CIA at some point, it's claimed. It's something that's so potent, it comes from a flower found in South America, I believe, that you could, if you just blow a little of the dust in someone's face and they inhale it, similarly, they could be out of it and have no memory of what happened for hours and hours. This is kind of like that, except people are choosing to be, there's no high to enjoy. One of the addicts said that it's you hit it and you go out and you wake up and you're already sick. So this is a scary situation. It's kind of like what we're seeing happen with the food supply. We talked about this here over the last few months, where it looks like the way things are going that the food supply is going to be so heavily controlled, where cities or regions, in a 200-mile radius, will have a food supply, a facility that does this vertical crop structure, this method, and you won't be allowed to grow your own. You'll have to get your food from corporations or the authorities or whoever. It seems to be going in that direction. We covered that a few weeks ago. Seems like this might be the same. Of course, the elites, they're still going to have their steaks. They're still going to have their real food. And it seems like the drug industry is moving the same way, the illicit drug industry, where the drugs for the people on the street are going to be stuff like this. It's just insane. Whereas the pure forms of these drugs will be reserved for those who can afford them. Recently, Jalen Ferguson, linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens, on June 21st, he died. It was determined to be an accident by the chief medical examiner in Maryland. And as the story goes, he got a hold of, he intended to do some cocaine. And as has been happening, especially in places like Baltimore that are known for their drugs. They're known for having plenty of drugs around. Cocaine, laced to some degree, to a lethal degree, with fentanyl. Fentanyl was found in his system, fentanyl and cocaine. No signs of trauma or foul play. Of course, they say investigators are not ruling out the possibility of an overdose. Pronounced dead at the scene, never regained consciousness. Out. Gone. Fentanyl and opioids were blamed for the record number of overdose deaths in 2020, as we just told you, according to a U.S. government report released in 2021. West Virginia is going to celebrate its first ever, it's not celebrate the right word, they're going to celebrate the first ever National Fentanyl Awareness Day. the Office of Drug Control Policy, the ODCP, will join partners nationwide in celebrating the first National Fentanyl Awareness Day, which was back in May. The day is designed to raise public awareness about illicit fentanyl mixed with street drugs and in counterfeit pills, which is a relatively new practice. And you're going to see quite a lot of details on that tonight. They say nationally, fentanyl is involved in more deaths of Americans under age 50, as we've already told you. This Fentanyl Awareness Day coincides with the DHHR's Office of Drug Control Policy and Bureau for Behavioral Health's focus on overdose awareness and prevention in an attempt to promote awareness of the rising fentanyl crisis. So they're bringing together organizations and agencies, correspond with media to target the public, youth audiences, parent and educator audiences, and individuals who use drugs. Something that's interesting about this is what it seems to really be doing is the drug addicts already know this. This seems to be calling attention to it. There's a certain segment of our population who are not going to be scared by this news. They're going to be intrigued. They're going to want to go find out what it's all about. In one of the documentaries that Summer found for us to check out, that was exactly what one of the dealers said, was that when people on the street found out that there was a batch, when they found out people were dying, people were suddenly overdosing, everyone was coming around trying to look, what did they have? That's what they want. It's economical, right? You want the most powerful that you can find. You want the most for your money, right? This is the way it works out there. This seems counterintuitive in a way. Still dealing with West Virginia here. This is where ABC News did their Poisoned America's Fentanyl Crisis series on, and we'll look at some of that in just a moment. Let's see here. We can get that off of there for you. There's the overdose death rate for this region. These are the overdose death rates per 100,000 people in the last 12 months. And these are the states with the worst. 3,500 people in Tennessee. This is the last 12 months. 2,300 people in Kentucky. 5,500 people in Ohio. Now, the number here would look strange, like, well, look, there's 1,607 for West Virginia, but you have to remember, it's per population, right? That's 90 people per 100,000. That's the highest rate. So it does seem to be more popular in certain areas, certainly more popular around the southern border. In this documentary, they interview a doctor who's had an HBO series made about him, Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton plays a character like this. When they interview the doctor, he says, I never envisioned prescribing somebody with pain would have this catastrophic tidal wave effect, he says. And he himself, the doctor, became addicted to prescription pain pills, taking as many as 30 pills a day before he got help. Today, he helps run a recovery clinic in West Virginia for other people living with addiction or in recovery. Let's deal with that term here in just a little bit. In recovery. Big problems with the addiction industry. We've talked about that here before. We've done a series on the problems of Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs. You can see that playlist here on this channel where we make our case. Why they're not going to solve anything. And we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. Of course, National Fentanyl Awareness Day. They give us some facts. Most of them we already know, but generally this is how the narrative is being delivered. Fentanyl is a potent synthetic opioid, up to 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. And then there's the carfentanyl, which is an analog of it. That's been a jazzed up version. The one that was the substance that was researched for use in chemical warfare. 10,000 times stronger than heroin. It's synthetic. It's not plant-based. It's made in a lab. It's purely from chemicals. And so the way this narrative is going so far is telling us this, is that here's why you want to be careful. And this is logical. Of course, this makes sense. But we do have a problem with this in one sense. Medical fentanyl is made in a sterile facility. Illegally made fentanyl is made in unsanitary conditions. Well, I'm sure probably in some cases it is. Is that in all cases? Where do the ingredients come from? Medical fentanyl is carefully blended. Illegally made fentanyl is sloppy mixing. Precise dose, carefully administered, and it's used for legitimate medical purposes. That might be debatable in some cases, and of course, death is uncommon when taken as prescribed by a doctor or an anesthesiologist. So the illegally made fentanyl is the dose is random. You don't know what you're getting. That's reasonable. That makes sense. It's hidden in the drug supply now. And when they say drug supply, they mean the illicit, they mean the street drug market. And the reason it's so popular is because it takes so little of it, can go so far, that drug dealers' profits have skyrocketed. What does that mean? Folks, this stuff doesn't just show up on the streets like magic. It doesn't just show up in the unsanitary place where it was mixed by magic. It comes from somewhere. Someone manufactures it. Some industrial situation, some company manufactures these chemicals, and as you'll see here in a minute, we'll tell you where it seems to be coming from. And who is it that's really in charge of it? Have we ever seen anything like this before? To me, if you're older than 35, 40 maybe, you remember the crack epidemic in American cities in the early 90s, late 80s and through the 90s, South Central Los Angeles specifically. The cities were plagued by this new superdrug, this new revved up form of cocaine, smokable cocaine, crack. This was just like this. And as the years went on, we came to find out how it was that amount of cocaine made it into the cities. And it wasn't the mafia. I'll show you in just a minute. We'll look at a clip in just a moment of... Yeah, we'll look at that in just a minute. I'll save that for you. So what is it? Fentanyl is a potent synthetic opioid drug approved by the FDA for use as an analgesic. That is a pain reliever. and as an anesthetic, something you could use in surgery. 100 times more potent than morphine, 50 times more potent than heroin as a painkiller. It was developed in 1959 and introduced in the 1960s as an intravenous anesthetic. It is legally manufactured and distributed in the United States, known as illicit fentanyl. Pharmaceutical products are diverted via theft, fraudulent prescriptions, and illicit distribution by patients, physicians, and pharmacists. Those are the ones who are carrying it to the next step. But who is it that's requesting it, funding it? Who's at the top? Who's at the top of this? From 2011 through 2018, both fatal overdoses associated with abuse of clandestinely produced fentanyl and fentanyl analogs in law enforcement encounters increased markedly. According to the CDC, fentanyl analogs were involved in roughly 2,600 OD deaths in 2011 and 2012. But from 2012 through 2018, the number of drug overdose deaths involving fentanyl and other synthetic opioid increased dramatically. More recently, there has been a reemergence of trafficking, distribution, and abuse of illicitly produced fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, with an associated dramatic increase in overdose. Numbers like from 3,000 to 30,000, like that kind of increase. Well, the common street names. This is, it's always to me a little funny to read the common street names because you can rest assured these are the names that nobody on the street is using for it. Apache, China Girl, Chinatown, Dance Fever. Give me some of that Dance Fever, I guess. Friend, Goodfellas, Great Bear, He-Man, Jackpot, King Ivory, Murder 8, Tango and Cash. Maybe that's the benzo dope. I don't know. But there you see on this penny, this is what they're telling us, that if you have no tolerance, you've never used before, that amount is all it would take to kill you. And by kill you, an opioid overdose is essentially, it's a breathing becomes depressed, becomes very difficult to breathe. You're not really even conscious to know that. And so your brain becomes deprived of oxygen very quickly, and that it only takes minutes for someone to die when your brain is being deprived of oxygen. What does it look like? Looks like transmucosal lozenges, things you would hold under your tongue, for example, commonly referred to as lollipops. Tablets, sublingual tablets, nasal sprays, which is a new kind of drug delivery method, transdermal patches, and injectable formulations. Now there is some false information that's going around out there that if you even touch it, you can die, and this is not true. There are forms of this. You can see there are some transdermal patches. It has to be with that other substance, that other component that helps it to absorb into the skin. You can't. It won't absorb into your skin without that substance, and it's not typically see it with that. They say clandestinely or secretly or illicitly produced fentanyl is encountered either as a powder or in counterfeit tablets and is sold alone or in combination with other drugs such as heroin or cocaine, as we've seen already. It's abused, being injected, snorted, sniffed, smoked, taken in a pill or a tablet. You can spiked onto blotter paper. Fentanyl patches are abused by removing its gel contents and then injecting or ingesting these contents, and on and on. The effect on the body. Just interesting. We probably would all want to know this. If it's really this prevalent, and any of us could encounter it just by walking down the street, I don't think that's true. But anyway, they say fentanyl, similar to other commonly used opioid analgesics, produces effects such as relaxation, euphoria, pain relief, sedation, confusion, drowsiness, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, urinary retention, pupillary constriction, and respiratory depression. Overdose would look like changes in the size of your pupil. It would get very small, tiny, pinpoint. Cold, clammy skin, cyanosis, that's blue skin. Coma, respiratory failure, this leads to death. If you get 3 of these symptoms together, coma, pinpoint pupils, and respiratory depression, that's what it looks like when someone is suffering from opioid poisoning. This is an overdose. These drugs are similar to morphine, hydrocodone, oxycodone, hydromorphone, methadone, and heroin. In the United States, fentanyl is a Schedule II narcotic under the United States Controlled Substances Act of 1970, and that doesn't seem to change anything. It's easily, readily available, and we'll show you how that is. And again, here are some of the signs of an overdose. Blue lips or nails, you can see that's cyanosis, dizziness, confusion. You can't wake the person up. And here are some clips. Now let's get into these clips where this will be in an affluent part of Newport Beach. And juxtaposing that with Skid Row, showing it's affecting all segments of society. Fentanyl has infiltrated American cities. It's now the drug of choice. I don't know if it is the drug of choice. It seems to be the only one that's available. All the other drugs are unavailable or laced with it. So here we see this YouTube channel here, Peter Centinello, and his colleague here, Bryce Batchelor, who go out on the street. And Batchelor here is going to explain fentanyl epidemic and how typical street drugs like cocaine, illicit pills, and even marijuana are turning out to be laced with fentanyl and or this benzodiazepine called xylazine. Let's check this out got a few clips from this.
When drugs go through their steps of the supply chain, at some point along the way, drugs are crossing paths and sometimes being contaminated with fentanyl. This has been happening quite a bit with methamphetamine and cocaine. These drugs are sold in tandem. Something like heroin or fentanyl is also coming through Mexico with cocaine being sold to similar buyers that then distribute out further to other sellers. And when these drugs are being processed, especially heroin, it's being cut with fentanyl.
Okay.
Cocaine is being contaminated or coming into contact with this heroin or fentanyl, which is then winding up in bags of cocaine that are being sold on the street level. It's still considered rare that you're gonna come across a bag of cocaine that has a lethal amount of fentanyl.
Okay.
But it's starting to happen more and more and more and more.
Is it by design to get people more hooked, or it's just by accident? It's in these drugs are close together in transport and production, so therefore something gets into something else.
If you are doing heroin or fentanyl, this is a sedative. This is something that brings you down and puts you in a sedated state. If you're taking cocaine or methamphetamine, that's not what you're looking for. You want to be in an elevated state.
Okay.
So mixing these drugs together doesn't make a lot of sense. It really doesn't make any sense.
Are people in Newport?
So there's that. That's what we were just talking about. It's interesting. That's a pretty good point. It's like you can't, if you want to get one of these pure drugs, it's not even available. You can't even find it anymore. Kind of like the food supply. Kind of like you can't get a hold of, you still can to a certain degree, but they're making it more and more difficult. They're taking over farmland. You can't get organic food. You can't get good food. It's harder to get now. But, of course, those with the money and the access can certainly get the good stuff, we could say. whether it's food or whatever it might be. This just seems to be another symptom of the Great Reset, of the new normal. Our world has changed, and 2020 was that pivot point.
And this is what?
It's a halfway house.
This right here.
Yeah.
People come here who have drug issues or whatnot.
Yeah, one of many in Newport Beach. There's, about a dozen rehab centers and halfway houses within 2 miles of here.
If you want help, you can get it.
Yeah, it's expensive, but yeah.
See there?
People are paying for this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's not go get free help if you're on the street and you got a problem.
Most of it's probably covered by insurance, but very expensive.
But who has insurance? When you're homeless on the streets. So you can see where this is headed. Well, once again, the addiction industry. I don't call it the treatment industry. It's not what it is. It's the addiction industry. They're making money off of addiction. To make profits, they need addicts. Supply and demand. That's how business works. So this is interesting how you can see that the people who they serve are people who can in no way really afford to pay for their services. I'm going to suggest to you that their services are not even necessary. But it's part of an overall narrative, an overall social engineering for us to believe, for the addict to believe that I can't stop. Because if I stop, I'm going to get sick, and that's dangerous. There's some mixed up logic there. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute, too. So let's look at this piece here.
We were just talking. She's like, are you filming a vlog? And I said, yes. About fentanyl. Would you like to be in the story? You know about fentanyl,
yes.
Obviously.
Someone very close to my family overdosed from fentanyl about a year ago.
Did they know it was fentanyl or was it laced or something?
I think it was laced because he was into heroin. It was just that last time. It's
Sorry.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Do you know if there's a lot of that going? Do you hear this from other people?
Yes, I know that it's laced in everything right now. My dad and my stepmom's sober, so they know all about that and they sponsor people. I know it's been laced with everything recently, so it's really scary.
All right, guys, so we're gonna get on the high.
So you just meet this young lady as she just, oh yeah, by the way, my parents, they're sober now. It's amazing. This story seems to be everywhere. All right, let's look at some of the characters.
Oh, gotcha. So what's the fentanyl scene these days? Let's just say in the last couple years, what's been going on here in Skid Row?
Everybody's doing it, and there's no more heroin. There's just fentanyl. It's even in it. They cut it with everything now. It's in methamphetamines. It's in cocaine. It's way stronger.
Please tell me it's not in Cocoa Puffs for kids.
It's not in Cocoa Puffs for kids.
Okay, not yet. Good to hear. You were saying
don't be so
a few
sure.
years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, not much fentanyl down here.
No, there wasn't. Fentanyl came around here in 2017. when I just got out of prison. People were talking about it, and I'm like, what is it? And then finally, when I went to the hospital and they gave it to me, I thought, okay, they really actually give people fentanyl, and they were like, yeah, it's in the hospital. So
they gave you quite a bit from the hospital, huh? Yeah. Okay. Do you have any on you right now?
I don't.
You don't? Okay.
Why?
My boy here, Bryce, tests it to see how good it is.
Okay.
He can test.
All right, so we're talking about test kits again. We showed this to you earlier. Where was that? There you go. Test kits. We've got these test kits now. You got testing strips. It's a big market for these now. And that's what the guys are doing here in this video. They're going to test her fentanyl, her dope, and it comes out positive, I guess. It doesn't seem to give you the strength or how pure it is or anything, but again, it's just... Now, this is what's happening also, is we'll look at Vancouver here in just a little bit. And what you see happening is they're making it extremely... they're making it easy for the addicts to continue to be addicts. cruising, patrolling the streets, looking for ODs and using the Narcan to save them. We'll get into that a little more depth here in just a moment.
Drugs, and then when they switch to a different different supplier, the buzz isn't the same. Like, wait, what's going on? This doesn't feel the same. Well, in their coke or in their crack or in their black.
Let's get through this a little quicker. His point here was he doesn't really see people dying from it the way the news says. His point was you only see people dying from it who are smoking it, or the people who die from it are when they're getting it and they don't know they're getting it. Don't know they're getting it. Like the Baltimore Ravens linebacker. And so, but the people who are the users, the regular users, they don't seem to be the ones that are dying. It's the first time user, or the person who thought they were getting cocaine and ended up getting something else. Okay, next we've got this. The entire supply of illicitly manufactured drugs or street drugs is contaminated with fentanyl. So if you got someone in your family, you know someone, be a good idea to let them know about this. And you have to be careful, because if you got someone who is an addict, it's likely if they haven't heard about this already, they do hear about it, they're going to want to test it out. That's how we are. That's how humans are. That's how it's going to be. But, this is what's going on. So let's check this out. This is going to be, he's going to tell us about the illicit supply.
But it's not going to absorb through the skin. We're also finding that, as I stated earlier, it is found throughout all of the other drugs that are illicitly manufactured now, and it should be considered a contaminant in the entire drug supply. When we look at the basic realities of this, we have to know one pill can kill. And we know this because the potency of fentanyl is so much higher than morphine. If we look even at heroin here, this is the amount of heroin on the left side of the screen that an average person would need to overdose on and die. If we look on the right side of this, we see the amount of fentanyl. It's dust compared to the other one. And then as a part of the illicitly manufactured fentanyl, there's another chemical that sits in there called carfentanil. And it's even 100 times more potent than fentanyl. And one amount of it that's the size of a grain of sand can kill you. And so when the illicitly manufactured drugs are produced in a lab that looks like this, on equipment that looks like this, you can imagine that a little bit of dust or something the size of a grain of sand could be in a pill and somebody doesn't know it. And we're finding over and over and over again that people don't even know that they're taking fentanyl when they take a drug. If we look at some of the examples of this, we see what is a normal medical grade produced Xanax on the top left. Below it is a counterfeit fentanyl Xanax bar. These are not.
That's alarming, because you can see that a tablet on the bottom, that pill on the bottom that looks like it came right out of a manufacturing facility, doesn't it? Friends, I wasn't born yesterday. Didn't just fall off the apple truck, as they say. We'll show you in just a minute a little clip that'll help you understand what it is we're really getting at here. This is not just about people ordering $5,000 worth or even $10,000 worth of ingredients from China, or having it delivered and cooking it up themselves. That's not what this is about. That's happening. We know who. The top dog drug dealers in the world are, don't we? Don't we? Don't we know who that is? They're not. This is not going to happen without their cut. From Seattle, fiercely addictive fentanyl-laced pills are flooding our communities and tearing families apart, driving the spikes in crime, homelessness, and death. You hear from federal officials who are fighting to kill the cartel smuggling business and raise awareness about this health crisis. Certainly there are cartels, I'm sure. But also, right, we cannot we know, right? Staying on. I'll show you a clip here in just a minute. That'll make our case a little bit better for that.
Where, needles, 6 o'clock. Are you finding that the fentanyl, the meth, whatever other drugs you're seeing are more addictive now and stronger than they used to be?
I think certainly compared to maybe 5-10 years ago, there's a lot more polysubstance use. So you've got meth and opioids together, and that creates all kinds of problems. I've definitely got to wear a lot of different hats.
Now, one of the problems was, they were doing some wound control here. One of the problems was that he mentioned there is that when you have these substances mixed together like this, it's, if someone's just using an opioid and they're overdosing on that opioid, Narcan's going to work just fine. This stuff has been so strong that they're seeing, what they started seeing was that the Narcan wouldn't work as quickly, or they had to give several doses for it to work. But these mixtures that have the xylazine, the benzodope that's become so popular, if someone's overdosing on that and the major culprit is the benzodiazepine, anytime you mix an opioid or an opiate with the benzodiazepine, both of those depress breathing. That's the deadly mixture. And if someone's ODing on that and you give them the Narcan, there's a chance it may not work because the Narcan does not reverse the effects of the benzodiazepine. So these are deadly substances.
That creates all kinds of problems.
Synthetic.
I've definitely got to wear a lot of different hats. Is this actually bothering you? It is? Okay. Wound care, addiction medicine, psychiatry, substance use, normal breaths in and out, you name it, all at once. There you go. You are definitely like a field medic. I'd been in Bosnia before and seen, you cough for me? Field medics, and they're out doing this, and you've got to kind of be aware of your surroundings. Hey, Elliot from Seymour Medical, how are you doing? Because you're definitely out in the street. It's their turf. It's not, it's their home.
Have you tried fentanyl?
In the blues.
The blues?
Smoking the blues.
You smoke the blues? Are they pretty prevalent? Pretty easy to get if you wanted some?
The blues, yeah, they're everywhere. Everywhere. It's heroin and meth you can't find anymore.
There you go. Can't find those, we'll just use the term pure. You can't find those pure drugs anymore. Just like one of these days you won't be able to find a steak. All you'll be able to find is that synthetic meat. Let's listen to what the federal agent has to say.
Right now in our country.
I believe very strongly this is an existential threat to the United States. China and Mexico are flooding our city streets with poison.
There's the big part of, and we're talking about a real drug epidemic here, and we're also talking about a very effective narrative. China and Mexico. Depends on who you ask. You ask some dealers, some people who are buying it and making it, and you'll see that Vice has done some documentaries about this. If you trust Vice, don't trust Vice implicitly. Watch their content with discernment. But you just see people ordering it and mixing it up in their kitchens. And I saw someone in the chat just a minute ago, how are these people not getting caught? That's a great question, right? What happened in 2020, since 2020 in major cities? Police are just kind of told to stand down. Don't pay attention to this kind of crime or that kind of crime. And so the illicit drug market is booming. Doesn't seem to be a top priority for law enforcement at the moment. At the southern border, it's a sieve. It's just an open wound, and people come across with whatever they want to bring. And so we have the overall narrative. Where is it coming from? Is it really coming from China? Is it? We'll tell you. We'll give you an article here in just a minute about the flow of fentanyl into the country. Where does it start? Where does it come through before it ends up here?
100,000 overdose deaths, 64,000 of those overdose deaths directly related to synthetic opioids, mostly fentanyl. This is a big issue and a major threat to the United States, a public health and public safety threat.
Are the cartels aware of the political climate here where drugs are essentially legal now because of the changes in the law? Do they know this is a ripe community?
It's a good question, but I would say that the drug cartels have absolutely no concern whatsoever for the legalization or the criminality that's associated with drug trafficking. For them, it's all about making money. This is a $500 billion a year business for the drug cartels. They're making a lot of money. They're looking to drive addiction. Fentanyl is highly addicting. And for them...
So there's a claim. The cartels are looking to drive addiction. I don't know. Of course, obviously, you would expect the cartels to want to have more addicts, but there certainly is a way. To mitigate that. Stop that, right? Just enforce the laws that you have on the books. But that's not what's happening. These laws are being overlooked. So why are the cartels able to drive addiction, to run it up, to increase it? Because they're being allowed. They're being allowed to do it. And in some cases, they're probably working right alongside our own government agents, or our own, or corporations, from people from our. I'll show you. Well, just a minute. A couple more clips, and we'll get to the one I've been building up to here. Well, this is a meeting from North Texas, a panel discussion with local experts about fentanyl poisoning, which is the right word, poisoning. It's not overdose. This is a poisoning, and how it's impacted North Texas. And they're trying to do their part to alert their community, but it's an hour and a half. We're not going to watch it all. But as we watch this, as Summer and I watch this together, there's just a lot of worldview problems. The way they're looking at the problem overall, you can tell it's never going to be solved. So let's listen to this addiction counselor here.
Hi, I'm Nancy Headley. I'm an addiction counselor at Aspire in Frisco, Texas. And I'm so grateful that we're actually having these conversations right now about fentanyl, because over the last 2 months, I get a call at least once a week. Either somebody has overdosed on fentanyl or died on fentanyl. So these conversations need to be had, especially with our children at home, because the fentanyl.
No one seems to be all that bent out of shape that we're not. We have laws already. No one seems to be too worried about the fact that the police departments are essentially in the big cities, in the larger cities, they're just overlooking it. Everyone's upset about the deaths, but we're not looking at why it's happening. Why is it being allowed to happen?
Fentanyl is being
population
put into
control.
Adderall. It's being put into Xanax, just like the officer spoke of, and you can't tell the difference between the pill that you get from your pharmacy or the pill that the cartel has brought in. I was just in South Dallas a couple of months ago with the DEA and also SAMHSA, and they are shipping the amount of pills into this area exponentially. And you were talking about, the vape pens. Even the vape pens are being, laced with the fentanyl. So I'm so passionate about this because I never thought that it would hit our community the way it is. Me, on my side, I'm seeing such an increase in my patients that are either dying or coming to me and telling me that they had, overdosed on fentanyl. I'm so grateful that there's Narcan back there, because I believe every home should have the Narcan. I know that, we don't want our kids to use drugs, but you know what? They will experiment. But at least with the education that we can go home and talk to our children about what could happen, and then have a life-saving device of the Narcan to be able to give to your children. If that happens, you have that in your first aid kit, just like.
So you hear what she says there. It's just inevitable. Your kids are going to do it. They're going to experiment. It wasn't always that way. It wasn't always that everyone in the nation was compelled to have substances on hand to reverse the effects of a heroin overdose or a fentanyl overdose. This is what it looks like when a nation is under judgment. When God hasn't completely withdrawn his common grace, but he's allowing people to fulfill the desires of their heart, the human heart, which is wicked. This is what it looks like when a nation rejects its purpose, its divine ordination, rejects the Creator that provides for it, and embraces relativism and humanism. And our churches in these crucial areas and cities. Listen to this. I was going to play this later in the show, but this is. Let's play this first. I want you to hear this pastor. This really shook me when I heard this pastor, what he's about to say. This is a pastor, ostensibly anyway, a Christian, a pastor of a Christian congregation.
Give her a round of applause.
The death rate from overdose is disproportionate in the black community. Why is that?
We are a trauma-based community, fear-based community.
Before he gets to his statement, I want to make a comment about that we've been talking about here for 3 years. It's true. The black community is targeted. We've seen this. This is not a myth. Planned Parenthood has a strong presence in inner cities, and you can see we showed it in our last show that the abortion rate for African American women is almost 4 times what it is for white women. Well over double what it is for Hispanic women. And it's not hard to see why that's happening, because they're being marketed to. They're being told that Planned Parenthood is there to help. Worldview, they're not being. Well, listen to what this leader of this community has to say next.
It becomes how we so-called self-medicate. What I can tell you is that most of the people who come here, they're broken. They're broken from something.
What is that, though? What are these people broken from when they come in? Is there some kind of unusual thing that's out of the control of God, God doesn't know about? They're broken from something. What are they broken from, Pastor? What is it that they're broken? Why are they broken? What is the problem? Is it families? Is that the problem? Is it Is it poverty? Is that the problem? Drug addiction, is that the problem? What's the problem? What is the problem?
Something broke them, and most of them have been let down. Most of them have been abused. They just can't get out.
So here we go. We've got a victim mentality from the start. Now these young men here, they deserve better guidance than this. Listen to what he's about to say.
And if they want to,
They are the only ones who can help themselves because no one else is coming.
our motto here is no one else is coming to save you. You are responsible for yourself.
Said the pastor. Does this pastor know what the gospel is? Does he have any idea what the gospel is? How can you sit there as a, well, we assume anyway, man of God who is responsible, a shepherd of a flock of Christians. And that's how he presents himself. He tells us that's who this is. Pastor Brian Moore. This is in St. Louis. No one's coming to save you. This is why this problem is going nowhere. This problem's doing exactly what it's intended to do. Right. And we can point the finger at corporations and pharmaceutical industry, and we can point the finger at China and Mexico. We can point it at our own government. But ultimately, it's your adversary. Satan loves this. Look, this is a preacher. And he's telling these young men, you have to save yourselves. Jesus can't do anything to help you here. Right? Jesus has no jurisdiction here. This is a very low view of Christ. This is no view of Christ. That blew me away when I heard that. This is how we know this thing is going nowhere. There's no proper perspective.
The racial disparities here are stark. A fifth of all city residents live in poverty, but black people are 3 times more likely than white people to be affected.
And 4 times more likely than white people to have an abortion. And why is that? They're being marketed to. They're being engineered this way, like the rest of us are to some degree. Here is another addict. We'll listen to what she has to say.
State streets are very dangerous.
Yeah, I'll go out and talk to people, let them know what's going on right here, all right?
Hi, baby.
How are you been?
So what are you doing to stay clean?
Amy still sees women she was prostituted with years ago who are still dulling the pain of this life with fentanyl.
If you're not ready, I get it. I've been there. You know me, I used to walk these streets with you every day, right? But when you are ready, we're here for you.
Amy said, are you ready for help? And you said no.
Well, that's good. That's good. They're there. They're telling her that, look, here's a way out if you want it. But there's something missing in that message. Something very important, something crucial, something life or death that's missing in that message. And that's why this is going nowhere.
What do you mean by that?
I'm not ready to give it up. I mean, I was clean for 3 years. I was going to the methadone clinic. When I broke my ribs and I couldn't walk, I was in so much pain, and I got back on the fentanyl to kill the pain. And I've been back on it since.
So how much are you using?
Maybe about $100 worth a day.
Wow.
So when you get ready, I'll put you in detox, whatever works for you. It's your recovery, it's not mine.
Are you tempted at all by what Amy's saying?
Yeah, I mean, I hear it, and believe me, I kind of want help, but then I don't, you know? I go back and forth with it. I have to be ready. I don't want to come back out here and do this all over again.
What's the message here, folks? This is sad. This is sad. Sad situation. What's the message here? We love our sin. We love our sin. That's what the Bible tells us. We love our sin. And here's evidence of that. We love it to death. Where does it come from? Well, what we're being told, what we're, that's China, right? It's coming from China. In fact, what keeps coming up in this, if you do a little research on this, is the Wuhan connection. Familiar, right? That's where these ingredients are being produced and sold, shipped into the United States. Look, if they wanted to stop that, they could. They could. And they did. They did stop fentanyl itself from being shipped into the United States from China. Just anybody could order it. Didn't even have to be on the dark web, just website, just regular website. And you order it and they ship it to you via UPS. Chemicals and raw materials derived from China and India, machinery as well to make pills, to stamp pills, to press and stamp pills. These things are shipped into Mexico, and then the drugs are manufactured, mixed, and then they're delivered. I'm not saying they're smuggled into the United States. I'm just saying they're being delivered because nobody's stopping it. Nobody cares. These drugs are pressed with machinery, implements that come from pharmaceutical manufacturers, retired pill presses and things like that, where you can press and stamp thousands at a time. How are they able to get a hold of that? Someone has to okay that. But they do. No one seems to care. Just let it go. Stand down. Let Black Lives Matter burn the city. Let this stuff come into the country. Remember, folks, that the agenda for the 21st century, what the Club of Rome set down 40 years ago, was this. For their new world order, this multipolar world order, to be formed, you have to take down the United States. But you can't do it all at once. Everyone will see that. That'll be obvious. So you do it over a period of years, of decades. Where are these drugs coming from?
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
That is an answer for a lot of you. Now, can you please?
I refer.
All right, now, can you please?
I refer direct.
Wait a minute.
That's the director of the CIA sitting at the table, and he's just been called out for what we all know now to be exactly what was happening. Part of the Iran-Contra scandal, and not just that, but part of it too, where drugs brought in from South America. Cocaine, of course. By the CIA.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute here.
They don't like it.
Wait a minute. If you don't like what's going on here, please leave now. No, leave. No, leave now.
Nobody expected this to happen. Right? This kind of thing can't happen today. They cannot afford for anything like this to happen today. I don't think anything like this could happen today. But it certainly did happen in the 90s.
Because there are others who do want to hear what's going on in this room. Will you please take your seats? I will come back to you as we roll back across to the center section.
That's CIA Director Deutsch.
I will refer you to three specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower.
That's Mike
I
Rupert.
have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence. My question for you is very specific, sir. If in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity,
Let him speak into
and it's
the mic.
classified, will you use that classification to hide the criminal activity, or will you tell the American people the truth?
All right, you want to hear the response first from Congressman Julian Dixon and then from the director. Wait a minute. From your, I'm sorry, sir. I will allow the director to speak first and then Congressman Julian Dixon.
If you have information about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest 3 places.
You can look up Mike Rupert. You'll find out who he is. He is who he said he was.
The Los Angeles Police Department.
Yeah, bring that evidence into the LAPD. They'll be happy to investigate themselves.
I'm sorry, others want to hear this.
See, and these people who lived there, they knew this was going on all along. What it took one man to have the guts one man who was there inside and saw it, to have the guts to stand up and point it out. And now it's just common knowledge. That's exactly what they were doing.
Answer.
Inspector General or office of one of your Congress persons from this.
18 years ago, sir, and I got shot at for it.
So it goes on back and forth like this. He's all he's doing is he's filibustering. He's just telling, yeah, if you've got any evidence, bring it to us. We'd be happy to look at it. No, they don't. So where's it coming from? Where does it come from? Where does it really come from? How is it like the person in the chat a little bit ago was asking, how? Why are people not getting caught? Like on the Vice documentary, how is this woman able to stand there in her kitchen and mix up these drugs for her own little community, sell them, people coming in and out of her house all day long? Vice is there making a documentary about it. Nobody cares. How's that happen? So it's a little more out in the open. It's not a black market anymore. It's part of the mainstream. So it's a little different than we saw back in the 90s with the crack epidemic in Los Angeles and other major cities. It spread fast. And yes, been shown over and over again that it was our own agencies bringing the dope into the country in massive quantities under George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas, the airport where they brought the drugs in was in his state. Yeah, come on now. You know, this problem's not going anywhere because this problem has been manufactured. It's a real problem. But they want it to happen. I'm not saying everybody. Within the DEA, within the CIA, within the FBI, and with all these agencies and in the government, there are people in there who care. People in there who really, really care, whose conscience hasn't been seared, and they just serve the dark side. So there are good people there. But until these good people are willing to risk something, it's just never going to change. And we have to change our perspective. We can't have pastors, we can't have community leaders telling young men in the community, hey, nobody can save you. You have to save yourself.
More people are using alone. Another cause, increasingly toxic drugs. Experts speculate border closures have disrupted the supply, leading some to concoct mixtures with additional
Watch
chemicals.
this.
This one is fentanyl, and we don't need much sample. We need about 10 milligrams, or the size of a match head.
Alan Custance is a spectrometer.
This stuff is basically legal. No one's doing anything to stop it. I'm sure there are some arrests here and there for looks, for cosmetics, but nobody cares.
Technician with Get Your
It's
Drugs
just all out in the
Tested
open.
in Vancouver.
So you get your drugs tested. If you're a dealer,
Alan
you can take your
Custance
drugs
is
down
a
to
spectrometer technician with Get Your Drugs
this little
Test
place and
in
get your, how pure are my drugs? Listen to what they say.
Vancouver. He tests samples that are dropped off or mailed in from across Canada.
We get all types. We get people who are dealing, checking their substances, checking
We
what to
get
buy.
dealers. Dealers come on in and check. Right? You see, because the point today is not, hey, let's get it off the streets. Let's cut it out at the source. Today the message is, well, let's just make sure that everybody's drugs are clean and pure. This problem's not going anywhere. It's not meant to go anywhere.
Or people who are cutting their samples and trying to see what percentage that they've cut it at.
After the border closed, Custance says he started seeing drugs with benzodiazepines cut in, which, like fentanyl, also depresses the central nervous system.
And it's fentanyl. You can see it just peeking out.
Then he started noticing higher amounts of fentanyl.
Normally it sits around 5 to 10%. We were seeing, 15 to 20, 25 to 30, so much stronger. To most people, that is enough to overdose, even a season.
And you can bring your...
in their drug.
And the dealer can just come in and get his supply tested. No worries. No worries.
Drugs before they take them. At this overdose prevention site, testing is available a few days a week and carried out by a team working for Vancouver Coastal Health.
So be careful with that, Matthew, because it is a little stronger than perhaps you.
And so as a user, he's sitting there like, yes, got the good stuff. Now I know where to go buy it. This is silly, folks. This is silly. These people think they're doing the right thing. There is a moralism. There is no standard of truth, but there's a moralism. They're doing what they think is the right thing to do.
We've had lately.
I'll say something here in just a little bit about what I think they ought to be doing that might be controversial, but I'll guarantee you it's the truth.
Yep.
Normally it's like 5%, and this one here is 10 to 15%.
So now that you know that's stronger, what does it change?
I guess I'll have to do like, 3 times less.
And let's see how many fentanyl analogs we've got here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
When Phoenix Beck McGreevy was trained to do the testing last fall, she hoped people would throw their drugs out if results showed they were stronger or contained unwanted chemicals.
Really? You test their drugs and they come out and they're just super strong and you expect them to throw it out. This is what it looks like when, let me read something for you. What is the first? Let me just read this for you here. The first thing. What's the first thing that we see when a nation is when a person or a nation is under judgment? What would you expect to see? Well, you'd expect to see things like sexual revolutions. We've been there and done that, and then the trans revolution, which is just transgressing all boundaries. No boundaries exist anymore. You would expect to see darkened minds where people can't reason any longer. They can't make good decisions. That's what Romans 1 tells us. The lowest level of God's judgment is a darkened mind, a compromised intellect. So this is why we see this. None of this makes any sense.
But that's not happening. She's both disappointed and empathetic.
If you've spent your last $10 on it and there's any fentanyl in it at all, you're going to do that sample, whether I tell you that it's got something you don't want in it or not, because the sickness needs to be kept at bay.
So the question remains just what can be done to prevent more people from dying. There's a growing call by some, including from the...
What can you do to keep more people from dying? Well, the instinct is to let people be free, to let them do what they want to do. But if they really did that, then these people would be allowed to die. But of course, no one wants that on their conscience.
Pills that I take every morning.
Inside each of these plastic packs are hydromorphone pills, synthetic opioids. Each day, David Keeler is given 28. He started taking them in March after getting a prescription, but still ends up turning to his dealer most afternoons.
I mean, it just doesn't reach my addiction. It doesn't touch it. Maybe more than half of the people that I know that are on these are just looking to sell them. Shake them, dump them. So I'll take those right now. I'll take all of them. But
Keeler chooses to take them, and today washes the pills down with coffee.
2 more, so.
But he says the problem with Safe Supply is that people aren't given the same drugs they're addicted to.
Safe Supply.
In his case, heroin.
Right. This is also known as harm reduction. Safe Supply. Let's bring people in and let them let's make sure they have clean drugs. And the thinking is, well, this is humane. This makes us good people. We're caring for people when we do this. Here's the Vancouver documentary. I would suggest, now this is a DW document. No, this is not. This is from the real Vancouver. This is, make sure this is the right one. This is the right one. But look for the DW documentary. About the epidemic in Vancouver. It's about, I think it's an hour and a half long. You'll learn everything you need to know. I think we know more than we want to know at this point. But they want to make it safer to be an addict. In fact, these people, in the Vice documentary, they said, well, this is a marginalized group. It's a marginalized group. These people have chosen, right? If you're a minority, you didn't choose to be born into the world as a minority. But you absolutely chose to be a drug addict. That's just a hard truth. We can talk about the disease model, and we will talk about the disease model in a moment. It's nonsense. It's nonsense.
I'm right in the heart of one of downtown Eastside's worst affected streets. One small medical centre is looking to do exactly that.
So we're going to go to Crosstown Clinic.
And what happens at Crosstown Clinic?
So we provide injectable hydromorphone and injectable diacetylmorphine to clients with severe opiate use disorder.
And what is diacetylmorphine?
That's heroin. Diacetylmorphine, that's heroin. So they're given, anyway.
Pharmaceutical-made heroin, really.
Okay, let's go inside.
Come on in.
Very happy to have this here.
That's right. It's a medical centre that gives heroin to people in addiction.
Now, this has been tried in Europe. I think the Netherlands, some other European nations, and of course, all you hear is, "Oh, it's been successful," but you don't know. You don't know. It's been successful at doing what? At creating more addicts, at keeping addicts safe, at making.
The door needs to close. There we go. So come on in. So the clients are here, so the nurses do a pre-assessment for them. Sorry, ladies. They enter into this room. They come up to this window here, and they'll give their name, their birth date, and the nurse will provide them or hand them their syringe. Rick, can you just pass me a syringe?
Not just a syringe. You would think, oh, it's a needle exchange, but no. This is a shot ready to go.
Thank you. So you can see here that we get, this is the dose. So it'll tell us the client name and then the drug that they're on.
Sad.
What are you getting there, Dave?
Heroin, diacetylmorphine,
And how often do you get that?
3 times a day. And this is my lunchtime fix.
It's another drug transaction in downtown Eastside. But rather than toxic dope sold in a back alley and injected behind a dumpster, it's a regulated pharmaceutical given in a medical setting and supervised by people who care.
Supervised by people who care, right? It's ethical. It's ethical. According to what standard? According to what standard is this ethical? Let's do a little bit more.
I'm introducing the heroin into my body now. It is now in there. It's itchy, wawa. Makes me itchy all over, like serious itchy. I turn red and get really itchy. But my my desire for heroin is met. Oh, wow, that was good.
Prescribing people heroin as a treatment for addiction. It's a challenging concept, but the evidence is persuasive. Switzerland.
The evidence is persuasive. Switzerland
opened a similar centre in 1994, and since they've seen huge reductions in overdose deaths, HIV rates, and drug-related crime.
But more addicts than ever. Right. Is that what the globalists want? How has anyone read A Brave New World? Where everyone in the nation gets up in the morning and they all walk down to the facility where they're given their daily supply of soma, which keeps them docile. They don't ask questions. They just do what they're told. Now, these are real people, these addicts who are here, and you can't blame them, right? They're going to do what they feel like they need to do to survive. It's a tough hustle on the street to get a hold of your drug of choice. It's work. It's a daily job. Sometimes you don't succeed and you have a terrible day. Feel bad, but you don't die. But you don't die from not using. People who say you do, it's a big myth. So what's happening here is it's just being made. What's the logical conclusion of this? You tell me. Where does this lead? If this continues, how long is it until we have facilities that are just full of people who just live there, who just lay in a bed all day with an IV in their arm? So this is known as harm reduction. The addiction treatment industry is promoting the maintenance and provision of harm reduction facilities and programs. This is creating a new class of full-time, lifelong, state-sponsored drug addicts. Wards of the government. property of the municipality or property of the corporation that funds the program. Folks, this is another project. If you read the Sustainable Development Goals, you'll find things like this in there. It's all about community, right? Serving the needs of the community above the needs of the individual. According to what standard, of course? According to their arbitrary standard, whatever the standard must be for their agenda to work. Another project here for the agenda for the 21st century. It's known as Agenda 21, 2030, Green New Deal. It's all the same thing. It is the structure. It is the infrastructure of the New World Order. Here in this article, we see where in British Columbia, in Vancouver, new overdose sites in Vancouver. Several overdose prevention sites, they call them overdose prevention sites, were announced Thursday. This is back in 2016, in response to the fentanyl crisis. 2 new overdose prevention sites announced aren't meant as permanent supervised injection sites, but are an emergency response to the current opioid overdose crisis. Now, this article is 2016, and what we just saw there was Vancouver, where you did have an injection site, so you can see how that's progressed. There's a lot more work to do, but this signals people are willing to start that work, said the Overdose Prevention Society's Sarah Blythe, who is among those who have been stationed at a pop-up supervised injection site in an alleyway near a supervised injection site. Sites are described as indoor places where drug users can be supervised for overdoses by those trained in administering naloxone. The 2 new locations in Vancouver announced Thursday. One is at, well, it's on the street here, and both were established with the support of the Vancouver Police and City Council. So it's very interesting to research where the funding for this actually comes from. This article is telling us that both were established with the support of Vancouver Police and the City Council. So some city funding. Where did that funding come from? The provincial health officer spoke about the necessity of these sites, noting that BC Coroner Service has alerted his office to expect another dramatic increase in OD-related deaths. And so they had big numbers back in 2015 and 2016. All of them fentanyl-related. He says we're not doing sufficient enough work. He's also noted it's been a challenge to know exactly how much has been spent combating the overdose crisis in BC since the effort is being taken on by multiple health authorities. But he estimates about $43 million spent so far in 2016, at this point in 2016. He says these sites aren't supervised injection sites, but we just saw where they did have them. This certainly would become one of those things. He says they don't require federal approval, noting the sites simply allow for interactions that would have occurred in any case out in the alley, right? They're going to do it anyway. So let's just let the government show up and let you and help you have this and facilitate this debauchery in a warm, safe venue, as they call it. He says, what we're doing here is trying to save lives. Right? That's the mantra of the new normal. Saving lives. Don't you want to save lives? Isn't that what we're supposed to do, is save lives? No, not all of them. You can't save all of them. But the moralism is plain to see here. So there's that. And one of the organizations that's doing this in Vancouver is Foundations for Social Change. Let's see what this, sure was this newly, I don't know if this has to do with our story or not. The world's first direct cash transfer program to empower people. This is a homeless. They're helping the homeless here. I don't think these videos are going to be about our story necessarily, but let's move on into, before we get into what I think the solution is, does this sound familiar? I mean, when a nation is, in this case a continent, is overwhelmed with a particular substance, addictive substance. We've seen something like this happen before. Throughout history, civilizations have always had various reasons to start a war. Are we seeing history repeat in some way here? And that was the case in the United Kingdom and the Chinese Qing dynasty, who had dynamic, turbulent, and conflicting viewpoints on how their diplomatic and trade relations should be arranged. It all led to the Opium War, also known as the Anglo-Chinese War. The first Opium War took place from 1839 to 1942. I think he meant I think that's a typo. I think they meant 1842. And was followed by a shorter one starting in 1856, ending in 1858. Yeah, so from 1839 to 1842. And 1856 to 1858. The conflicts followed after the trade balance was lost. When Chinese goods were on demand, import of silk and porcelain grew in popularity in the West. I'm talking specifically about Britain here. And it was accompanied by an insistent demand for tea in Britain. All along, for China, the market was virtually non-existent. The country was self-sufficient. And some of their official statements were things like this. They would say there's nothing that European ships can bring across the seas, saying that we don't need anything from them. We have everything. We're self-sufficient. However, the 18th century was a time when the majority of European empires gradually expanded across the globe, enforcing their economies via maritime trade. And it was a lucrative venture that they did not want to end. China needed to think of and develop new concepts on how they could stay in the game, to be a part of this booming seaborne international trade system and network. The establishment of the Canton system in 1757 turned out to be extremely lucrative for the Chinese as well as for European merchants. The Canton system allowed monopoly trading rights to private Chinese merchants, elites, we could say. The economy was not centralized any longer. It was a system with similar monopoly rights to that which the British India Company and the Dutch East India Company were already granted by their governments. The change meant a flow of silver for the Chinese merchants. Silver was the only compensation they asked for in exchange for their goods. All was well until the British realized in 1817 that they could reduce their trade deficit. They could make more money if they turned their Indian colony profitable by counter trading in narcotic Indian opium. So they have control of India. They can produce a lot of poppy plants in that climate. So that's what they did, and they created lots of opium there. And the Chinese Qing administration would initially accept an import of opium, as it created an indirect tax on Chinese subjects, while Britain doubled tea exports from China to England, but the opium trade went out of control. By 1838, the British were selling roughly 14,000 tons of opium per year to China. What's that doing to the Chinese people? Whether to legalize the narcotic or not was a huge and ongoing debate among Chinese officials. There were serious consequences for this opium import in China, and hence enforcements were necessary for China to thrive. So the Chinese realized for their nation to thrive, they needed to squeeze this opium import. They needed to slow it down because it was having a a really bad effect on their nation. Their people were becoming addicts. Couldn't do anything. Opium gradually grew as a problem that nobody could disregard any longer in China. The situation escalated in 1839 when trades were closed down and abolished, and China confiscated around 20,000 chests of opium, about 1,200 tons, without offering any compensation to the British. Those had been some of the first radical steps that the Chinese made to eradicate this opium trade that was killing them. The Chinese emperor questioned the moral reasoning of the British government. He questioned how could China possibly profit from opium when it was prohibited in Britain. He said, we're selling you something your people can use that it's illegal in our country because we know what it'll do to our country. So this is kind of, this could be a way you could take over a nation by just getting its people hopelessly addicted to benzodope. Opium, let's see, the emperor wrote a letter to the queen. This letter never made it to the queen, but the letter supposedly said this: Your Majesty has not before thus been officially notified, and you may plead ignorance of the severity of our laws, but I now give my assurance that we will cut this harmful drug out forever. The emperor was dedicated to his mission to eradicate the opium trade. He also stated if the opium trade is not stopped in the next few decades, we shall not only be without soldiers to resist the enemy, but also we won't have any money to fund an army. Interesting, isn't it? That opioids and opiates would be a way to take down a nation. The tension and unrest between the two countries did not stop until the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, which granted far more rights to Britain. Wasn't a good deal for the Chinese. It also allowed the Britons to take control over Hong Kong Island. So this is how the British took control of Hong Kong Island. The treaty failed to better the relationship between the two nations, and it led to the Second Opium War. The whole conflict was a major blow to the Chinese reputation in the world at the time. However, it did mark the start of modern Chinese history. But there's a background to this, a background in monetary policy, central banking, and commodity money. Much like today, central banking is the name of the game. Dealing opium was a way for Chinese merchants to produce quick capital. They needed silver to purchase opium, but they sold it for silver as well. So like tea, it could increase their capital reserves. With tea, they had to give silver payments in advance, so it might be 6 months or more before they saw returns on their investments. But opium, in good years, could be sold within days of its purchase. So it was a liquid asset. So silver supplies could be replenished very quickly. A few quick sales of opium at the beginning of a season gave Chinese merchants more silver to buy tea and less need to take out high-interest loans from foreigners. Except for a few bribes to the mandarins, no duties had to be paid to the government. Thus, opium had the unique characteristics of producing profits in its own sale. Expanding tea sales and reducing usury costs, both of which increased tea profits, and it did all of this without creating new debts or duties owned or owed. The minimal risks involved in trading opium in China in the 1760s meant that there was much more to be gained in selling it than lost in avoiding it. So the trade continued to expand. This blending of legal and illegal trade, the willingness of Chinese on all levels to accommodate smugglers, and the uniformity and convenience or connivance fees and practices, and the need for large quantities of silver to exchange for tea all contributed to a flourishing opium trade because the illicit trade supported the legitimate trade. It was easy to justify because the illicit trade supported the legitimate trade. It was easy to justify, or at least it was easy to tolerate. As a result, the efforts that the government made to stamp out smuggling before 1835 were always too little too late, and often ill-matched to the situation, as it usually is, because the people are the ones who suffer when governments, oligarchs, and elites decide to drugs, folks, guns, oil, and drugs. That's how they make money in this world. That's how it used to be anyway. Things may be changing a little bit, but it's shifting away. It may not be so much oil anymore, but it's energy. An unholy trinity of tea, silver, and opium blew up to such proportions that when the crackdown came, the British backed most of their tea with the opium trade, a trade that was now almost 4 times the size it had been when silver was predominantly used. They launched the Opium War primarily to capture port cities. This is a way that the British seemingly took control. They enforced their economy on the Chinese. The Chinese lost their port cities to foreign traders. They didn't really want to take over China. They just wanted to continue their very lucrative drug business. And they knew, even going around the Chinese leadership at the time, there were people inside that country that would buy those drugs from them. Because there were people inside that country who were addicted to it and wanted it, needed it. So the articles, it's coming from China, right? Wuhan, that's what we've seen in a lot of the documentaries. But there's an article called Fentanyl's New Flow. In Guadalajara, Mexico, graffiti artists don't paint murals of the leader, nor do locals pin songs about his exploits as they do for traffickers like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But for the years before his capture in 2018, Gan Xingbing's success in the city drug trade signaled the emergence of a new power player on the scene, the Chinese national. As Chinese-made fentanyl, synthetic opioid, as we've already flooded the U.S. market in recent years, Chinese nationals and Mexican cartels have worked ever closer. For instance, Gan's role was to handle the considerable financials. The scheme was straightforward, but it ensured no money touched the U.S. banking system. You have to take down the United States. That's the global conspiracy. You have to take it down. To have an equal playing field in the world, you have to remove the United States. The business person would use their Chinese bank account to send the equivalent Chinese yuan to Chinese bank accounts. In exchange, leave the U.S. cash. And he usually took a commission of 5% for his troubles. Then they would return the now clean money to Mexico. Researchers at the University of California, San Diego have developed disposable sensors which can detect micromolar concentrations of fentanyl in just 1 minute. So why is it still coming in? Now, a couple years ago, or it was when Trump was in office, they got China to ban the production of fentanyl. All right, so that stopped some of this. It slowed it down for a little while. But what happened was precursors, or the ingredients to make the fentanyl, they just started selling that to anyone who wanted it. In 1999, 33 years after Belgian chemist Paul Janssen developed fentanyl, FDA officials were sufficiently concerned about its potency that they delayed the rollout of an orally administered version of the drug. 100 times stronger and far more rapid acting than morphine, fentanyl's ability to penetrate fat has made it a favored pain relief for gastrointestinal surgeries. But It is only administered in micrograms, 1/1,000,000th of a gram. In a minority of cases, in clinical settings, morphine was and is still the most commonly used intravenous post-operative opioid. The center point of the Golden Triangle, this is the confluence of the Ruak-Mekong rivers, where the borders of Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos meet. This is the Golden Triangle. This is where heroin, this is where opium poppies grow well. But in recreational settings as well, fentanyl remained in the background until very recently. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, opioid addiction centered on heroin, fueled by waves of poppy cultivation in Turkey, Afghanistan, and the Golden Triangle. And how did that heroin get into the United States? We know now, don't we? Our government used our military to bring it in here. A tract of land on the border of China's Yunnan province, comprising the remote jungle regions of Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as Americans increasingly became hooked on prescription opioids like OxyContin, the profit potential of synthetic or semi-synthetic drugs became obvious. Created from chemical cocktails in labs, synthetic drugs don't require swaths of farmland, loads of workers, or long harvest times. The Golden Triangle's illicit drug production thus shifted from poppies, from growing poppies, to methamphetamine, a stimulant that could be produced in great quantities either from tiny mom-and-pop pill presses or giant industrial labs spewing out millions of yaba or crazy tablets each year. China's burgeoning chemicals industry fed the production boom. Developing petrochemicals, industrial compounds, and pharmaceuticals had been a focal point of Mao Zedong's quest for self-reliance in the 1960s. Drugs. It's always been about drugs. That's how certain leaders, anyway, know that they can secure power. And his successor, Deng Xiaoping, placed chemical output at the forefront of his open door policy in order to attract foreign investment. By 2001, China's chemical industry was worth the equivalent of $14.5 billion, a fraction of the $1.7 trillion sold by the United States. But at the time, China's industry was growing at 8 to 9% every year. In 2008, Beijing even introduced lucrative tax breaks to further boost its chemical industry. Opium wars. This is history repeating. There's nothing new under the sun. Pharmaceutical manufacturers, most of whom had built plants near Beijing or Wuhan, accounted for 17% of the industry, and increasingly they offloaded chemical building blocks known as precursors into the Golden Triangle's meth industry. Blue Shield Casino, operated by the King's Romans Group, located in the Golden Triangle Free Zone in 2018. The Zhaohui transnational criminal organization was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department because of drug trafficking and other activity facilitated through the King's Romans Casino. I think we get the idea. This is a long article, but, in 2014, when China had a meth addiction problem of its own, leader Xi Jinping led a crackdown on domestic drug production and corruption. China's illicit chemists scattered across the Yunnan border to command monstrously large Golden Triangle meth cartels. The Canadian-Chinese kingpin, here's a name, Si Chi Lop, for instance, who was captured last January by a coalition of 20 law enforcement agencies, is estimated to be worth $17 billion, almost 9 times that of Mexico's El Chapo. China's remaining chemists started turning to fentanyl around this time, and fentanyl was legal to produce for medical purposes in China. Its recreational use has been outlawed since 1996, and producers began offering the drug for sale online, enticing over 2 million opioid-addicted Americans with an even bigger high. Enticing Americans. Typically shipped in small packages direct to users, U.S. Customs and Border Protection didn't have the technology to detect fentanyl shipments. They also didn't have the desire to check for it, clearly. And the U.S. Postal Service didn't scan international packages. Americans could order the world's most lethal drug as easily as their groceries. China really didn't want to do much about that, especially on the generic controls over fentanyl. So there's clearly willful negligence there. Bryce Pardo, Associate Director of the Drug Policy Research Center at the RAND Corporation. Ding, 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 we have a winner. Fentanyl, said fentanyl coming into the U.S. started to be a problem. So in 2014, he says the Obama administration began asking China to take action. But the chemical composition of fentanyl made it easy to turn regulatory action into a game of whack-a-mole. In 2015, for instance, the Chinese issued controls over some precursor chemicals like synthetic cannabinoids and methcathinone. That's a tough one, methcathinone. But manufacturers could just tweak the compound, adding, removing, or substituting single atoms to produce any one of a very large number of fentanyl analogs, according to a report by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Music star Prince died from a fentanyl overdose, and that raised awareness of the problem in the United States. And in September 2016, the Obama administration said it, in Beijing, had agreed to enhance measures to curb fentanyl shipments, including targeting U.S.-bound substance shipments and working more closely with law enforcement counterparts. President, let's see. But the agreement had no measurable results, says this Walters. China's chemical industry was now worth an estimated $1.5 trillion, 40% of global chemical sales, and analysts say Beijing balked at hobbling an industry generating 10% of its GDP. China's FDA equivalent, the National Medical Products Association, claimed that just 15 of its 5,000 plus pharmaceutical producers were involved with illicit substances, a ludicrously lowball figure. In October 2016, then Secretary of State John Kerry claimed there were over 130. So it goes on to give some more, gives here the fentanyl framework, how it comes in. We get the picture here. This article is found at Wire China. You can check out wirechina.com. You'll have to, well, you can read it for free if you join their community subscription thing. You can read one free article every 3 months. That's why I shared that one with you. So this is where it could be coming from. But how it's getting into the country now, it's being allowed into the country. It's something that's being allowed to happen. And as we've seen here with these organizations making it simple, making it easy for people to be and remain addicts. What's the problem? What is the problem here? Well, it's something called moralism. Right? It's hard to point out to people why this is such a problem. It's hard to get people to understand what you're trying to tell them. Right? These people are doing they're doing something good for their community. Right? They're keeping these people from dying. Right? Well, obviously, none of us want to see someone die. We don't want to let somebody die. But people die every day. It's a fact of life here in this world. Secular organizations and activists are busy doing all they can to either appear to be doing the right thing or they actually do believe they're doing the right thing according to endless standards, right? They think they're doing the right thing, so they're making a value judgment, but they don't have any one standard that they're operating by. Everyone has their own idea of what good and evil is, of what right and wrong is. Moralism is commonly defined as the practice of morality as distinct from religion. A non-religious person who nonetheless lives by a personal moral code can be said to hold to moralism. Another more negative definition of moralism is an undue emphasis on morality. In this case, the moralist would be seen as a prude or a self-righteous or overly austere moral snob. We also have religious moralism, like the Pharisees were religious moralists, legalists. Christian moralists tend to reduce the Bible to a manual of moral behavior. That's what we call Christian moralism. But moralism cannot replace the gospel. Of course, this is what they would like, is to find a way to do the right thing aside from God's word, aside from God's law. But moralism cannot replace the gospel. We're all sinners in need of God's forgiveness and grace. Moralism has no power to justify or sanctify a sinner. We're saved by grace through faith, not by keeping a moral code. So we have blurred lines in our society today, because we have people operating according to no objective standard. They all have their own idea of what should be legal, should not be legal. But Jesus drew lines in the moral landscape. He opposed the religious hypocrisy of the Pharisees and Sadducees and set a proper distinction between what is holy and what is hypocrisy. And for this he was killed. Anytime you offer a statement of certainty to the secular world, they're going to hate you for it. Who are you? Oh, you're holier than thou, aren't you? All you have to do is make a truth claim. Be certain, and people will hate you. But the powerful testimony Jesus left before his death and after his resurrection, recorded in God's revealed word in the Bible, his words and life are a beacon of light to all who want truth and desire to know the difference between right and wrong. With Jesus, there were absolutes. Sadly, that's what the people out here will tell you, that we're just, that's your truth. We're living according to our truth. And meanwhile, they're not doing society any real good service. With Jesus, there really is such a thing as truth and error, right and wrong, eternal life and eternal death. But today's world, relativism, which is the bedfellow of the secular, is becoming the temptress of the sacred. In the world of the secular, people are taught to avoid making judgments, whether it be in regard to other people's beliefs or lifestyle preferences, sexual orientation, moral judgments, faithfulness, or personal ethics. The secularists want tolerance shown to their ungodly lifestyles. They want tolerance shown to their ungodly lifestyles. So they consider sin to be an out-of-date concept. It doesn't really exist. It's meaningless. The world does not want the Christian to shine light on its sin. Instead, the world wants to have its sin without condemnation, without guilt, and without consequences. We want our sin without death. The wages of sin is death. That's not going to work out. The world offers a philosophy of it's right if it's right for you. And what's wrong for you is not necessarily wrong for anyone else. In the secular realm of relativism, there are no absolutes. There are no paradoxes. There are no truth statements except to say that all views are acceptable, except the Bible. We don't tolerate that one. In Judges 17:6, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes." When there is no king, that is to say, when there is no God, then truth becomes a disposable opinion. Secularists of today like the kingless people of ancient Israel who have no direction, want to do what is right in their own eyes. It doesn't take long, my friends, for any of us, any serious Bible student, to recognize the problems of all we've seen before us here tonight, the problems of relativism. But it isn't only in this secular realm. It's in the Christian church too. We see so-called Christian denominations and churches that approve of homosexuality or couples living together, or who preach from how-to books, not the Bible, who water down the gospel and teach a weak doctrine of God, sin, Christ, and salvation. Unfortunately, these kinds of churches are in bed with their secular mistresses and are being seduced into further and further spiritual adulteries. Their eyes are not on God's word, but on relativism. That is why the lines that Jesus drew so sharply in the Gospels, which separate the sacred from the secular, are becoming more and more blurred by the relativism of today as it seeps into the Christian church. Doctrine is important. There are absolutes. The truth is, there is an absolute right and wrong. We find it in Scripture. That alternative lifestyles are not an alternative at all. They're just rebellious acts of people who oppose God, and they oppose His institutions. There can be no compromise on the truth. There's only one God in all existence who has always been. Jesus is the only way to salvation. If you do not believe and trust in Christ alone for salvation, then you are damned to eternal hell. These are only some of the many truths of the Bible that are under attack from the world, from the cults, and other false religions. As unpopular as they may be, they're still true. We as Christians, we need to sharpen these lines between truth and error. That's what we're trying to do here. To do this, we must first know what the truth is. What is the standard that we're operating by? We must know what the Bible actually says about right and wrong, about doctrine, about God, about ourselves, about judgment, and about Jesus. And then we must be willing to say, that is a sin, when we see it as sin. We must be willing to stand up for righteousness, even if it costs us. If it costs us our comfort, if it costs us our lives. Far too many Christians compromise and let the world take their truth and gospel in exchange for comfort and safety. The manifestation of this compromise is found in churches with social agendas instead of biblical mandates. So that brings us to our final segment. So we want to talk a little bit about the addiction industry here. But first of all, as we set this up, let's hear from a couple parents, and it's tough. It's tough to hear. Let's see, to hear these. Let's hear from this one. We have probably just enough time to hear from her. This is one a mother whose son died from an overdose on this. And what we want to do is we want to listen to what she's saying. How does what does she have to say about it after it's over? And what could we offer? Right? She's angry and she's confused because she cannot understand why her good kid, with all the advantages, cannot understand why he chose darkness over light. Her pain is understandable. And we sympathize with that. But what this mother is really saying is, I was shocked to find out that my kid was just like all the others, that my kid is a sinner, that my kid wasn't immune.
Hannah, and we know this in the last 2 years, there's been a 116% increase in fentanyl deaths. Fentanyl being 100 times more potent and lethal than morphine. And it only takes 2 milligrams to actually kill you. So think about that when you're looking at these grains of salt. That much is deadly. These images are alarming.
Stay with her for a second. I'm gonna go get another dose.
But they're real. It might look like a scene from a movie, but this is Billings, Montana. This body cam video shows the exact moment a Billings police officer revives a woman with Narcan after she ingests a deadly dose of fentanyl.
Can you hear me?
There you go. You okay? Yeah. Stay down. Stay down.
This time her life is saved, but not all are so lucky.
It's Russian roulette. It's your typical American kid.
It's been 5 years in Kim Ettinger's.
There you go. Typical all-American kid.
Still carries the grief of losing her only son.
You know, everybody thinks it could not happen to them. We were exhausted. We were exhausted and we were scared.
Her youngest, Caden, commanded a room, standing tall at 6'4", with the ability to make anyone laugh.
Was captain of the cross-country team. He was straight-A valedictorian, you know, wanted to go into the medical field.
But July 27th, 2017, Kim says that bright future vanished.
And all of a sudden that tornado stops and everybody flies out and one's gone. And you think, how is this even possible?
Caden was given...
So you know the story. How is it even possible? She says. How is it even possible that this happened?
Happened to them, right? I didn't know anything about any of this before, and I think it happened to me. You know, I guess until it happens to you, then you think, oh, it might be somebody else's problem, or it might be, you know, would not happen to my family. I'm telling you. I mean, it happens. It happens.
But what is the problem? What is the problem that everyone's talking about here? What is the problem? Right, the pastor. This guy here. This guy here. What's the problem?
What is the purpose of that meeting that you have with those guys?
It is order. See, when you're in the street, there is no order. It's pretty chaotic. I have to have structure in this place.
Now, you give him some credit for that, right? He's able to offer structure, right? That's a start. That's not enough. It's like Jim Osmond said the other day in our interview. If I give this young man here structure, I've given him the opportunity here to stabilize his life, but then his soul is lost for eternity, what good have I really done?
Bring about a certain amount of peace and security. All right, both thumbs pointed toward the target. Everybody got that?
This man of God is also a firearms instructor.
Fire. Deep breath.
It's in his blood. Pastor Moore traces his ancestors back to a famous slave preacher, Nat Turner, who led a bloody rebellion in 1831.
Now, watch how solid she is. Give her a round of applause.
The death rate from overdose is disproportionate in the black community. Why is that?
We are a trauma-based community, fear-based community. It becomes how we so-called self-medicate. What I can tell you is that most of the people who come here, they're broken. They're broken.
They're broken from something.
From something.
Really? What are they broken from? Are there some people in the world who are not broken? So that's what that would imply, these people. There are some people in other places who aren't broken, I guess. But what are they broken from? More importantly, what's he saying here? What are they broken from? What is the problem? What is the real problem? So far, we haven't heard from anyone who understands the problem.
Something broke them, and most of them have been let down. Most of them have been abused. They just can't get out, even if they want to.
They are the only ones who can help themselves, because no one else is coming.
Our motto here is no one else is coming to save you. You are responsible for yourself.
It's our motto here at the church. No one's coming to save you. What is the problem?
Fast. There are kids that can do it for 3 or 4 years and take these pills, be fine, and no one ever knows, and they're fine. And then there are some kids that could try it with their friends once or twice, and it's happening younger. I just read an article where a 12-year-old overdosed and died from it. A really cute little gal. It can affect anybody. That's, I guess, my thing is I want people to know is it can affect anybody. It doesn't have to be.
What can affect anybody? Is it just drugs? Can affect. That's the only thing out there that can affect anybody.
You know, someone who's down and out and whose families does drugs and they're just, you know, it doesn't matter if poverty, it doesn't matter if you're wealthy, it doesn't matter if you, it doesn't matter. It just crosses all borders. It crosses all categories and groups.
Let's hear this statement here. This will sell
shining light in this whole thing because she'd been through it. And about a year before my son passed, she lost her daughter, Mary Kate. And then the two of us talked and made me feel sane again. And
so there's whole communities, families, and they're confused. They don't know why this is happening. They don't understand how their good kid could be susceptible to this. They don't understand what the problem is. They're confused and angry, and they come together for comfort. And we can keep, human beings can comfort each other. We can comfort each other for a little while, but not for long.
You realize that, wow, this is the same story over and over, just different characters. You know, the lying, the lifestyle that goes with it. You know, the more they lie, the better they get at it. They're ashamed, and they're all good. Kids are not bad people. And when you lose a kid to something like drugs, you have the whole layer of losing a kid, but then you have this whole other depth where people look at you and probably wonder, oh, I wonder what they did wrong, or, you know, there must be something more to this story, and there's not. There's just not.
I think there is something more to the story.
People look at you, better they get at it. They're ashamed, and they're all good. Kids are not bad people.
They're all good. Kids are not bad. Kids are not bad people, she said. And that's this is the problem. We don't know who we are. We don't know our condition. And here's another statement to finish out.
Do you like that? Is that?
I'm mad at him. I'm still angry. I mean, we told him how this story was going to end, and it's not going to be good, right? I just wish I could tell him, why did you do this? Like, why did you even do it one time? You know, why? Why one time? Like, you had so many opportunities and you were so blessed. Why? You know, you tore apart our family, just shredded it.
We don't know who we are. There's confusion here because we don't know who we are. We don't know why the world is the way it is. We're all just running from the truth. Everybody knows John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes, so that believers, everyone who believes, everyone who has faith, which is the gift of God, in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. Everyone knows that. You see that everywhere. You see that at professional football games. People, it used to be a big thing anyway, John 3:16. Everybody knows that one. Everybody likes that one. But there's more right after that. Verse 18. He who believes in him is not judged for their sins. He who believes in him is not judged for their sins. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Means he has not understood or received or been transformed by the gospel. Verse 19 says, this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men love the darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. We're liars. We're deceivers at heart. That's who we are. We have to know who we are. The only way to get started on this problem is to understand who we are. Know our condition. Know who God is and know that we're not him. Right? She said that, but kids are, he wasn't a kid. He was a young adult. They're just good, right? They're good. They're good. We're all basically good. Romans 3 says, verse 4, let God be found true, though every man be found a liar. Verse 9, Paul says that we're all sinners. Verse 10, as it is written, none. There's none righteous. Not even one. There's none who understands. There's none who seeks for God. None. All have turned aside. Together they've become useless. There's none who does good. There's not even one. They cannot help to deceive, it says in verse 17, even themselves. Verse 14 says their first thoughts are about gain and self-indulgence, self-preservation. Verse 16 says in this condition they cannot help but to end up in misery and to cause misery. That's who we are. That's our heart. Verse 17 says they don't know the truth because they have rejected it. They hate the truth. And Paul's theology, verse 18, we see Paul's theology, which affirms that all these people, everyone knows God, but they do not respect or fear him. There's no fear of God in them. And so to finish up today, I want to talk to you a little bit about addiction. This is from a book called Romancing Opiates. We'll look at this from a perspective you might not have heard. As we covered this tonight, and if you go back and watch some other pieces on this, documentaries or news stories, I want you to listen. Listen for it everywhere. Anytime anyone's talking about addiction and addicts, listen for the passive voice. Listen for the passive voice. And what does that mean? The heroin comes to the man, right? The drugs find the person. The fentanyl found him. The fentanyl ruined him. The man doesn't go to the drugs find the man. You'll hear that message. It's as if fentanyl or any of these drugs have a will of its own. But the man doesn't have a will. Only the drug has a will. The man isn't responsible. The drug is active. The man is passive. They'll say things like, I fell in the wrong crowd. Fell in with the wrong crowd. Once again, the addict is the passive partner in a relationship. To fall is to be subject to the force of gravity, which it is vain for the individual to oppose. It is thus as impossible and fruitless to resist the influence of the wrong crowd as that of the force of gravity. Fell in with the wrong crowd. Fell into trouble. Fell into addiction, right? It's something that just happened to you. And heroin, fentanyl, being everywhere, it is as impossible. It's impossible not to use. That's the message we've heard. It is impossible not to use. Is that true? It's impossible not to smoke it or inject it. It's going to happen to you. The doctor here says, I meet many people who fell in with the wrong crowd, but I never under any circumstances meet any member of the wrong crowd itself, right? Who must therefore be lurking permanently out of my sight and hearing. A man who says that he is easily led a second-order excuse of those who fell in with the wrong crowd, never uses this characteristic to explain his good deeds, good characteristics, or positive achievements. Right? No one ever says, "Oh, I just fell into that great thing I did." No, they're ready and willing to claim responsibility for it when it's something that they're proud of. The modern orthodoxy about drug addiction is not only wrong, it's obviously wrong. As George Orwell said, sometimes the first duty of intelligent men is the restatement of the obvious. So this doctor, he worked in a prison, and he saw lots of addicts. In the relationship of drugs to people, it is the drugs that should be deemed by the readers to be the active party. It's the drugs here that the media is trying to tell us that are in charge. They have a mind of their own. Drugs are able, apparently without the intervention of human agency, to force themselves on unwilling victims, more or less as a tsunami overwhelms a coastline. It is as if drugs took people rather than people took drugs. The doctor says, "I think it's safe to say this is the predominant belief, both lay and medical, about drug addiction in general and addiction to opiates such as heroin or fentanyl in particular. The belief is symptomatic of our infinite appetite for victims. No matter how willfully self-destructive they might be, for victim status is the condition upon which we extend our compassion." They're serving us victims, and we eat it up. And we're eating up lies. We are pitiless towards those who are responsible for their own situation. Since we don't want to be pitiless, we deny the responsibility of those who, like drug addicts, make bad and even very silly choices. Since the first, talking about his book here, this book is called Romancing Opiates. Theodore Dalrymple, that is a pen name, of course. He says, since the first edition of this book was published, I have seen neither an attempt to deny his elementary arguments, his plain, publicly available facts on which his argument is based. He has seen no refutation of its logic. A few of my own friends have dismissed what I say on the basis that it is absurdly right-wing. How could the truth be right-wing or left-wing? These friends assume that every argument about every subject can be neatly placed on a single political dimension, left to right, and that anything right of center is self-refuting. In fact, I cannot see that my argument is either left-wing or right-wing. I hope I shall not be accused of naivete when I say that I was merely aiming at the truth of this particular subject. If some people find what I say right-wing, tough. If others find it left-wing, tough. As the fictional English schoolboy Billy Buntner translated, Magna est veritas, et prevalebit. Great is the truth, and it will prevail a bit. I get that last word. At a public discussion of this book in Holland, the doctor says he was accused of having set up a straw man. No one, I was assured by a professor of neuroscience, now believes in the propositions I am at such pains to expose as absurd, though unfortunately it is true that the very same propositions were believed only a few years ago. Indeed, these propositions still form the basis of public policy on this matter, right? It used to anyway, which lags so lamentably behind the neuropsychological enlightenment. No, says the professors, we have now gone beyond all that and reached the scientific truth. Thanks to functional PET scanners and the rest, we have proved that drugs alter neurology, brain cells, and neurotransmitters, and that therefore drug addicts cannot be held responsible for their own acts. Poor lambs. They need our help. If they don't get it, they're doomed to a life of everlasting torment. That's what we're supposed to believe. And the latest, I feel almost tempted to say, fashionable instrument of our sophisticated neuropsychological informed assistance to the victims of drug addiction, motivational interviewing. What drug addicts need is a reason to stop using. It was precisely my point that drug addicts needed reasons to give up, but that reasons belong to the language of meaning, purpose, and intention, not to that of brute physiological fact, except insofar as everything human beings belongs to brute physiological fact. He says, if I am right about opiate addiction, and of course, like all good intellectuals, I am open to correction, I illustrate in this book the baleful and philosophically primitive modern tendency to view social problems as merely technical ones to be solved by narrowly technical means. This tendency, in turn, is a symptom of what my late friend, the great development economist Peter Bauer, called the decline of connected thinking. Because of a surfeit of information, educated people find it harder and harder to connect disparate facts about the same subject, however obvious the connection might be. And as he said, the modern orthodoxy about drug addiction is not only wrong, it is obviously wrong. Man is the only creature capable of self-destruction. Only human beings in full consciousness decide to go out and do what is bad, even fatal for him. Not least among the attractions of the primrose path are drugs of abuse. It's always been so and will always be so. The temptation to obscure life's existential difficulties, dissatisfactions, and terrors by means of chemically induced oblivion has always been and will always be great, at least until the meaning of life has been found once and for all. Of course, we're coming at you from a different worldview than the doctor here. But he does have a spiritual approach. Let's see what he says. Romancing opiates draws the appropriate conclusion from this, that addiction to opiates is a pretend rather than a real illness. Treatment of which is pretend rather than real treatment. How and why addicts came to lie to doctors, how and why doctors came to return the compliment, and how and why society in general swallowed the lies wholesale. That's what the doctor explores in this book. He says, for 14 years, he worked as a doctor in a large general hospital in a British slum and an even larger prison next door. In that time, he has seen addiction to opiates, principally heroin, rise from an infrequently encountered problem to a mass phenomenon. He says, I would say as many as 20 new cases a day. I began to think about it more. The medical perspective, which coincided with their own, that these people were ill and need treatment, seemed to me less and less satisfactory or convincing. The number of drug clinics in the city increased dramatically, as did the amount of medication prescribed to addicts. But far from getting better, the problem only worsened. That's what we see. All of these programs, injection sites, all of these programs, treatment industry, the problem only gets worse. Of these prisoners that he was working with as a doctor in the prison, the great majority of them stopped using opiates when they in prison, even when the drugs were available. Drugs were smuggled into the prisons. That's self-evident. The addicts came into the prison starving and miserable and went out healthy and happy. Within a few months, however, many of them were back to their former condition, and not a few of them begged the courts, when brought once more before them, to send him back to prison rather than to let him go free. Strange world, indeed, in which incarceration is preferable to freedom. When soon after their arrival in the prison, I asked the addicts whether they intended to give up taking heroin, some of them would reply, "I'll have to. I've got no choice." I would then ask them why this was, to which they replied, "Because I've just had a baby and my girlfriend won't let me see it unless I do." In fact, this rarely led to prolonged abstinence, largely because the girlfriend in question soon found another boyfriend who objected to her continued contact with the father of her child. Anyway, the answer given by the addicts that the birth of their baby meant that they would have to give up taking opiates was a strange one if they truly thought that they were ill and in need of treatment. They clearly believed that a purpose in life was a sufficient condition to enable them to quit. This is not how pneumonia is treated. It's not how pneumonia is cured. That's a disease. No one would say I must stop having pleuritic pain each time I breathe deeply because I have just had a baby. The addicts themselves sometimes, not always, by means for reason he explains here in the book, the addicts themselves sometimes acknowledge that their condition is a spiritual one, using the term spiritual in a loose sense rather than a medical one. The doctor says, "I soon discovered that the medical services tent set up to assist addicts took a technocratic attitude towards them and their problems." Right? You need an expert to figure this out, right? You need experts at every step. This is what we see. This is what a technocracy causes. This is what drug addiction in a technocracy looks like, where there are experts there to set up ways to keep people plugged into their drugs. This is what experts do. No common sense. They focused on the physiological aspects of opiate addiction, since these were susceptible, at least in theory, to medical intervention, which in practice meant the prescription of a drug rather like the one the addicts were addicted to. These are maintenance medications. And there was a strenuous, almost outraged rejection of the idea that addiction was, at bottom, a moral problem, or even that it raised any moral questions at all. That's the argument we're making tonight to whoever will listen. This is not a social problem. This is a problem of the heart. The addict was seen to be purely and simply as an ill person. This meant that taking heroin was sometimes, or fentanyl, was something that just happened to people, just happens to them, rather than something that they did. In the process of turning the addict into a blameless patient, right, a marginalized class. Therefore, the doctors, nurses, psychologists, counselors, and social workers also turned an addict into something less than a fully responsible person, into someone not in charge of his own behavior, a creature or an automaton effectively without choices, intentions, or even weaknesses. So uncertain of their own benevolence were these functionaries, these technocrats of care, that they avoided all mention of the moral and spiritual aspects of addiction, since even to mention them was to risk being perceived as condemnatory and therefore a bad person, right? You can't call these addicts what they are. They have a substance abuse disorder. That's what you call it now, right? In this odd little subculture, which nevertheless echoes prevalent attitudes outside itself, only those who approve of, or at least do not express disapproval of, other people's behavior can consider themselves or be considered by others to be generous-minded. Moralism. Of course, it cannot be denied that opiate addiction has medical consequences, many of them very serious. For example, I would often see addicts on their arrival in prison who had deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary emboli. When they arrived, they would often have multiple abscesses. They would have tuberculosis because of the way they live. They would be malnourished, and so on and so forth. But medical consequences, however terrible they are, do not make a disease. if I go out tomorrow and I choose to jump off the roof and I break my leg, I don't suddenly have a disease called broken leg syndrome. Strangely enough, those in charge of the purse strings, those who fund these movements, have been only too ready to believe these lies and have paid for a constant expansion of their systems. It is easier, after all, to give people a dose of medicine than it is to give them a reason for living. That is something the patient must minister to himself. Or, our worldview would tell you that that is what the Christian worldview provides. The standard orthodox view of addiction is that these addicts are helpless. The man is somehow or other exposed to heroin. Right? He didn't mean to. It fell on him like rain. And he became addicted. To pay for this, he often has to resort to crime. But he's not responsible for that crime because, after all, he didn't mean to become an addict. His powers of self-control have now been completely destroyed or subverted by heroin or by fentanyl. Unless he takes a substitute drug or possibly enters an injection facility daily, he'll never be able to give up. He's hooked, and he's hooked for life. That's what they tell us. And so that's why we hear the passive voice about these addicts. When we find out, when we actually look at the science, we find out that the addictive nature of opiates is not as they have told us. We'll look at some of the logic here in just a second. I want to make sure I get some of these quotes. These are really the need for treatment is only alleged. He has the statistics in here. Suffice it to say that, as we said at the top of the show, that of all the people who abstain, who quit using drugs, a very small percentage of them, could be 10 to 15%. It's in this book. I don't recall at the moment. Could be single digits. It's a small number. We'll call it 10%. Let's say it's 20%. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say 2 out of 10 who quit using drugs went to treatment. And then out of those 2 that went to treatment, again, single digits, or 10 to 20% of those found success in recovery or in treatment program. Is treatment necessary? Does it work? There's a standard view of addiction in this way that is wrong in almost all its particulars. I'm speaking specifically about fentanyl here, or heroin. Heroin hooks no one. It takes effort and determination to reach a stage of addiction. Withdrawal from heroin is not medically serious or even horribly unpleasant, except in the fevered imagination of those who have been encouraged to think that it is. And today we have ways to help people be comfortable as they detox from it. Years ago, they didn't have that. Now we do. Heroin addiction does not drive people to crime as a billiard cue drives a billiard ball before it. It would be truer to say that a criminal disposition drives people to heroin. It's not true that once addicted, a person is a slave to the drug or a Haitian zombie with no power to make decisions for himself. Millions of people have abandoned opiate addiction when they have sufficiently strong motives to do so. And it therefore follows that professional help is not necessary for a person to quit. It's not true that the provision of ever more services for drug addicts has been accompanied by a decrease in drug addiction or any of the social problems associated with it. In fact, we see the opposite. These social programs just create bigger problems. More plausible to say that such services have resulted in an increase rather than decrease in the problems to which they are ostensibly the solution. Heroin addiction is not a medical problem. Fentanyl addiction is not a medical problem. Now, that's kind of a bold statement to make out here today, but this is the disease model of addiction. It's not the answer. Somebody told me I was showing the wrong thumbnail. There you go. All right, it's time to bring this. It's time to land this plane, folks. So the lies that the technocrats are feeding us is that drug addicts are helpless, that drugs are active and man is passive. The drug world has flawed logic. I'm afraid to quit because if I do, I'm going to get sick. It's going to be dangerous. The statistics on overdose deaths versus detox deaths is extremely lopsided. If you continue using, your chances of overdosing, well, and far outweigh your likelihood that you'll die from detox. I'm sure it's happened at some point, but it is not common. The disease model is not the answer. Any program that confuses the effect for the cause will only create a new kind of slavery to a new kind of idol, which is not freedom at all. There is a chemical component to addiction that must be dealt with so that the person can safely be brought back around to physical stability. In fact, this is a common grace of God. The fact that we have medications, we have ways to make people comfortable as they find stability. But the person's problem is not a disease called addiction. Their problem is a heart problem. The problem is false worship. Drug addiction is rebellion. It's idol worship. And AA and 12-step programs are idol exchange programs. Substance abuse disorder is a lie. Substance abuse disorder is just neurolinguistic programming to make the sinner feel more comfortable in his sin. God calls it drunkenness. Ecclesiastes 10, Jeremiah 13, Ezekiel 23. The word is drunkenness. The word is in the Hebrew there, shikaron, I believe it is. It means intoxication. It means what it says. In Luke 21, Romans 13, and Galatians 5, the word is drunkenness. It is in 1 Peter 4 also. The Greek word under there is methe. Methe. It means habitual intoxication. It's not as if the Bible hasn't spoken, as if God hasn't spoken on this specific sin. AA will tell you that addiction is a sin that you need special help with. You need special help with this one sin. It's a moralistic culture telling a sinner that he's a victim and therefore not responsible. This is why this problem only gets worse. And nothing will ever change as long as the approach is to make the sinner comfortable in his sin, with coping mechanisms that only distract the sinner away from acknowledging his true condition. Just like every other sin, Jesus is Lord over all of your life, over all of your decisions. We can never suggest or send anyone to a counselor or a program that does not believe in sin. These systems focus on the behavior. They focus on the outward appearance. They do nothing for the heart. Matthew 23:27, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Every human person was created to worship God. Every human person was created for that purpose. Therefore, every human soul is living in response to God, either living in communion with God or in active or passive rebellion against God. It's only two options there are: communion or rebellion. Worship of God or idolatry. And idolatry robs God of his glory and brings judgment on people and on nations. The lowest form of God's judgment is a darkened mind. You lose the ability to reason. Doesn't mean stupidity, but it means being given over to your own desires. You lose the ability to discern what is right and wrong. This is about lordship. Jesus is Lord of all of the world and all of our lives. The whole creation is his. And when Jesus spoke to groups of people, he never separated his sinners into little groups. Give me my drunkards over here. Give me my adulterers over here. Give me my enviers over here. No. James 5:16 says, "Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed." The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. So two things are happening in our culture right now: transformation through transgression. That is the progressive movement, tearing down all the boundaries. This is part of that as well. And then people come along to try to offer solutions outside of the gospel. And that is transformation without regeneration. Neither of them will work. The gospel and basic Christian discipleship, that is the answer. So here's our disclaimer about all of this. We invite you to go watch our videos about Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs. We'll include this one in there. We here at Armor of Truth are in no way minimizing the importance of early medical intervention for a person in the acute stages of addiction to any substance. Whether that person struggles with the sin of self-indulgence, self-deception, or that person has become an addict as a result of some kind of medical treatment. Our firm position is that the daily life of an addict is typically very unstable and unhealthy. But God's common grace has provided our society with methods to help a person safely and often comfortably transition to a daily life that is manageable, where the spiritual healing of the gospel can then be applied. While we do not recommend or approve of any traditional 12-step program, the approach of Alcoholics Anonymous or Celebrate Recovery or any similar pseudo-spiritual gospel-denying program, we do advocate and encourage intervention that begins with the gospel, recognizes the sinner's true condition as a rebel against God, acknowledges his need to repent, and to call on the name of Christ for the remission of sins, and acknowledges the lordship of Christ. We affirm fully that the gospel is the power that delivers all sinners from darkness to the light of life in Christ. The Word of God is infallible, inerrant, and fully sufficient for knowledge of God, salvation, and life as a Christian in this world. If you have any questions and you want to ask us about something you're dealing with, as far as this, and you may be looking for a way to get help around your area or something, give us an email. Send us an email to hello@armoroftruth.net and let us know what's going on in your life, and if we can, we'd love to be able to help you. So check out our videos, Armor of Truth Live number 157 and 158. About Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs, where we go in great depth and talk about the pseudo-spirituality there. It's a pagan spiritual system. It's polytheistic for sure. And there is a false gospel. A Christian cannot participate in AA or 12-step programs that are based on the same model. It's true, we give thanks to God and His common grace that He has used AA to deliver many people from bondage to alcohol, and 12-step programs to deliver people from bondage to substances. We're thankful that that's happened. It's not surprising. Praise God for that. God is sovereign over all things. People in the secular world are image bearers of God too. You would expect them to do something that was headed in the right direction. This is His universe. God used His servant, Daniel, within Nebuchadnezzar's paganism for His glory. God's judgment takes many forms. However, the question here is not, do people find sobriety in 12-step programs or AA? The question is, are these pagan spiritual systems? Right? If you become sober and you leave alcohol behind, and you're still lost for eternity, what have you gained? What good is it to gain all the world and lose your soul to hell? In AA and most 12-step programs, there are definite incantations, and catechisms, and oaths and prayers to idols. What is worrisome is if a Christian doesn't see the serious shortcomings of the 12 steps and doesn't seek to remove himself from the system and plant himself in a solid, healthy church, and in the study of Scripture under the shepherding of a faithful pastor. What we encourage is going deep with Scripture with the help of an older, spiritually mature Christian who knows their Scripture well, to see the full picture of how God provides for our warfare with sin, including alcoholism and drug addiction. And then seek to fight the battle alongside fellow Christians who share the same vision of biblical sanctification. A good church community is not optional. Right? Community is very important. That's one of the good things about AA. That's why it works as a secular solution. It's community, even though its success rates are abysmally low. God is 100% effective. When He moves you, when He changes your heart, when He saves you, when He redeems you and regenerates your heart, He never fails. It is 100% effective. A home with our family, a church community where you can find this kind of support in warfare against sin. They don't all have to be alcoholics. You don't need a room full of alcoholics. All of us, everyone in the room has besetting sins, and our strategies for overcoming them are all found solely in the Bible. You don't need Bill's big book. In fact, it's not good for you. Matthew 6:22 says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. If your focus is singular on Christ, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, if you're focused on all these other things, your whole body will be full of darkness. Then the light in you is darkness. How great that darkness. No one can serve two masters. Can't be a Christian and committed to the spiritual system of Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programs or Celebrate Recovery. Even though that claims to be a Christian program, you can't slap Bible verses on AA and call it Christian. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Here Jesus is speaking of the master-slave relationship. And no slave could serve two masters. The context of mammon or money or gain, worldly desire presented here, can be understood as something to which a person becomes enslaved. Mammon is drug addiction. Also, something that is valued more than the Lord. Anything valued more than the Lord is mammon. Jesus states that serving two masters is a simple impossibility. If you think that you are successfully serving two masters, then you are deceived. It cannot be done. As ancient Israel struggled with idolatry, they thought they could worship the Lord God and Baal. And God constantly reminded them that to worship Baal was to forsake the Lord God. To be loyal to one is to despise the other. Keep this in mind. When you see apologists for Alcoholics Anonymous in forums and in comments defending the gospel of the 12 steps as the reason for their sobriety, or the reason that they're even alive. No man has any power to provide that. God is sovereign. If you're here right now, it's because God has done it. You cannot be a servant of God while at the same time a servant of another spiritual system. Either God is served with single-minded devotion or he's not served at all. James 1 verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. But that person must not suppose that he'll receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man and unstable in all his ways. So it's plainly obvious and undeniable that these programs, social solutions are failing, will fail. All they're doing is creating, the problem is getting bigger. AA and 12-step groups and alternate spiritual recovery systems that apply the name of God or the concept of a higher power as a general term for false gods. For a Christian to show favoritism to anyone or any group who blasphemes the name or confuses the nature of God this way, to not only allow it to be done, but then to participate in fellowship with these groups, thus encouraging their error and plunge into darkness, that is to be double-minded. When as a Christian we participate or even encourage others in their error, we are doubting the power of God. We are openly, publicly doubting the power of the gospel for salvation. In other words, Christians who gladly participate in AA or similar spiritual programs are proclaiming that God isn't sovereign, not over this sin. This is a special sin. They're saying that God is, and that his gospel is not the power. But it's just another way alongside AA, another system from which we may or may not choose. The one who doubts and lacks faith should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. This lack of faith and trust in God also exposes that the person has no foundation, that the person is unstable in all his ways. Another word that describes double-mindedness. Serving two masters or being unstable is the word unbelief. Mark 9:24. The man who said to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, was not double-minded. He wanted to believe and declared his belief. His faith was weak, but it wasn't tinged with double-minded doubt. Thank you for staying with us tonight, folks. It's a long one. Thank you to thanks Jason Casper. We appreciate that super chat, that donation. Thank you very much. If you'd like to support us, my friends, please go to armoroftruth.net and click the donate tab there. There are links in the description to this video to help you support us if you'd like to. We need you to help us. The only reason that we're here doing this is because of the support we receive from you. And we'd love to continue to serve you this way. All right, my friends. Lord willing, we'll see you again here next time. Thursday at 4 p.m., as a matter of fact, on the Days of Noah YouTube channel. Look for us over there. We'll be live with Days at 4 p.m. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Oh, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
good luck. We're all counting on you.